drove by the other stadium in the Pac-2.
I was going to ask how Pullman is. But...
Yeah, Pullman is. We stayed in an Airbnb in Pullman. It was near the stadium.
Did you have any Cougar Gold while you were open? My whole family's Cougs, so. Every time you go out there, did you bring home cheese? I'm like, I'm never bringing home $90 worth of cheese. Like, are you joking? How am I supposed to keep that in the car? Coveted cheese.
But a friend who sends us a 10 every year of Cougar Gold.
Yeah. How do you go through that? My family does. I don't know how.
I bring it to work and it disappears.
Yeah, that's probably what my dad does.
What is it made of?
Huh?
What's it made of?
The cheese?
Oh, it's cheese.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah.
Contented cows.
Yeah.
I didn't hear you say cheese.
Crimson cows. No idea.
Line here somewhere. Okay, so we're broadcasting and recording. So, City of Philomath Planning Commission meeting is now in session. Can we please have a roll call? Haley Green.
Here.
I'll get my list so I don't have to go through up and down, up and down. Timothy Moon here. Josiah Justin is not present. Van Hutsaker
Here.
John Barlow
Here.
Darlene Rose. Darlene, can you hear us okay?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Hello.
That's like she can't hear
Okay, I'm trying. Can you see me?
Yep, we can now.
Okay, I'm here.
Here. From staff, we've got Chase and Chris. And City Councilor Ruth. All right. So our first item of business is a review of the comprehensive plan residential section.
We're not going to do the minute.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Why not?
Approval of minutes. I skipped right over that.
You're in such a hurry.
I am. See, I'm a little loopy. Any comments on the minutes? Any motions? Move to approve.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Hi.
Unanimous? All right, thank you all. Now, comprehensive plan residential.
I will get us started. So I won't read the whole document, it's not pages. I'll hit some bullet points though. If you read the document, it was an excerpt from our comprehensive plan, specifically regarding housing, and more specifically regarding compliance with Land Conservation and Development Commission's statewide planning goal 10 around housing. The purpose is to require incorporated cities to complete an inventory of buildable residential land, policies that address affordable housing for low-income households. In context, I'll just read the first paragraph here around this. Was since 2000, Philomath grew from 3,838 people to 4,900 people in 2019. That's an addition of 1,062 people, or 28% growth. About the same time, Philomath's housing stock grew by about 550 units, or 37%. Most of the city's housing stock is single-family detached housing, around 75%, which is a larger share than Benton County and other nearby cities. Since 2000, housing prices in Philomath increased faster than incomes, exceeding similar trends across the state. Median gross rents increased by $232 per month per month from $595 in 2000 to $827 in 2014-2018. More recently, median housing prices in Philomath increased from about $268,000 in 2016 to $293,450 by 20.9%. And brief editorializing, I mean, that's 4 years old now. When I was looking at housing prices here in Philomath, I can't find anything below $400,000. recommend. So, and that's the lowest, not the median. So the housing market has obviously continued to heat up in the years subsequent the study. So moving on to the more prescriptive side of things, 5 goals were laid out with policies as subsection. The first goal is to address land availability to ensure adequate supply of range available and serviced. A few policies in here that I just highlighted were things like encourage development of small vacant, partially vacant parcels with policies that support development of infill housing types, especially in areas with existing urban services, or policy 1.5 to identify opportunities to reduce development costs through changes to infrastructure development standards when appropriate. Goal number 2 is housing opportunity.
Jason, can I pause you there?
Sure.
Did anybody have any surprises in reading through those policies under goal 1? As you went through them, is there anything that stood out to anybody on the commission?
I'm just gonna say, I noted the same two he did, and I think both those areas, some areas we can look at to further enhance the opportunities.
Yeah, when I asked Jason to do the review, it was really those things that are essentially directing code change. Some of this stuff is stuff we can do within the code. Some of it is policies the city council is going to have to take on and other types of things. But specific to the code revisions, that's really what we wanted to hone in on this review that Jason's providing now. So, all right, go ahead.
Sure. Goal number 2 is housing opportunity, to provide opportunities for housing development to meet the city's housing needs. I noted the first section, policy 2.1, to develop clear and objective standards for all types of developments that incorporate principles of good urban. Get some subsection bullets here. Policy 2.2 will allow for and encourage a wide range of housing development types to meet the housing needs of all income levels in both existing neighborhoods and new residential areas by removing or lowering barriers to residential development. And policy 2.3 provide for a variety of techniques to foster flexibility, creativity, and innovation in the division of land, siting of buildings, and provision of community amenities such as trails and open spaces. So goal number 3.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
What do we mean by barriers? Okay. You mentioned removing or lowering barriers in policy. I think it was mentioned a couple times. I'm curious what specifically we mean by barrier.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's the provision. We can go through the policy on the comprehensive plan, but it could be a variety of physical barriers for people. It could be maybe they don't understand the documentation. They're looking at menu assistance.
Something that was discussed a lot when we were developing this was when a developer sees a piece of land, they'd love to do something on it, they want to invest in it, but they find that our code restrictions or the lots just a few square feet too small, or
Right.
this or that or the other thing, and then they know that they have to come and it's not certain that they'll get approval, and that the process takes a long time. So things to streamline the process, to develop property, loosen up the rules to allow the flexibility to make good things happen, which is all far easier said than done. But those
It's an
are the things.
oxymoron,
But
in reality.
it is an oxymoron, but it's something that this group is tasked with doing, is
Right.
to look at the code to see if we can do things that make it easier to allow people to do things.
Any and all barriers,
Any and all
where it's just
barriers.
encompassing all. Okay. I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure I wasn't.
For sure.
Thank you.
Goal number 3, affordable, safe, and accessible housing. Provide opportunities for development of housing affordable to all income levels. I noted policy 3.2, 3.5, and 3.7 on this. So support the development of market rate housing for households with low and middle incomes. This includes households with an income between 60 and 120% of MFI for Benton County, which is the 40,500 to 97,200 range. And those numbers are a few years old now, but mostly all right. 3.5, support a diverse mix of housing to meet the needs of current and future Philomath residents, including first-time home buyers, new families, older adults, and persons with disabilities. Policy 3.7, support home ownership opportunities for all types by encouraging condominiums, cooperative housing, manufactured home parks, and other types of ownership methods that allows residents to build equity. I'm just noting these because these were ones that I thought were good conversation pieces, and I tried somewhat to address in the code changes as they exist. Darlene, do you have something you wanted to say?
No,
Just wanted to make sure you were trying to jump in.
no, it's just rearranging things a little bit.
Comments on policy 3 on affordable, safe and accessible housing? Again, some of this is policy the city council could do, like trying to find grant money from the state to put towards housing costs and maybe artificially lower entry into housing or rents or something, but some of this is derived by the cost of development, right? So if we can look for ways to make the developments less expensive, that's gonna help bring those prices down a little bit too. There's a chicken and egg question about, does it mean that the property actually costs less or just mean that their profits go up, right? Because the market rate's gonna stay, the market value is gonna stay the market value just because you make it less expensive. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna charge less. You have to kind of couple that with some other tools, right? You've got to do some deed restrictions, and there's other tools that we would utilize to make sure that any savings and the cost of the housing would be reflected in a reduced cost of the housing.
And I'm looking forward to some discussion about lot sizes and minimum house square footage and those sorts of issues that can actually decrease what's obtained, which is going to reduce the cost. Whether it's enough is another question, but if you build a smaller house, the top price is lower. So how do we feel collectively about our minimums and those sorts of things?
So goal 4 was sustainable housing. We encourage sustainable practices in planning and developing housing. I highlighted 4.2 and 4.5, which 4.2 is green infrastructure to promote the use of vegetated stormwater facilities, pervious pavement, and similar green streets elements compatible with publicly mandated infrastructure.
You're building some now?
Yeah. And 4.5, green space, coordinate with developers, builders, and contractors to ensure that any new development allocates area for green space. So a lot of stuff we're already trying to tackle. And goal 5 is funding, to identify funding sources to support the development of infrastructure and housing for developments, which is code specific, but it's always something to be thinking about. So yeah, all these policies are outlined in the comprehensive plan and are to be incorporated by cities according to LCDC. But some of this can be addressed in the code. Some of it probably is better addressed through council or other mechanisms of municipal government. But I just wanted to keep those in mind as we look at the code and try to think through what changes you'd like to make and how we'd like to see it apply.
Any big questions on section of the comprehensive plan or?
I'll say there's definitely things that Chase and I have already looked at in the code that address some of this, but there's, going through it again, there's a lot of kind of low-hanging fruit here, things where some pretty quick changes in the development code can make a big difference. We just met with an applicant today for a pre-application meeting on a small subdivision, maybe 27 housing units in a low-density residential neighborhood, and we talked all the way through the pre-application and left, and it wasn't until I got reading this prepared for night meeting, I was like, oh yeah, open space, green space, there's no parks in that area of town. We should hit them up and we collect park STCs in order to pay for future park space, and we didn't even bring it up today. It wasn't even on my checklist. So I need to add that to my checklist, but we also need to find somewhere in the code that we can require them to negotiate with the city for sale of however many of acres of land development, right? And we used to require that they donate land dependent upon how many units they were doing. But we've reformatted our SDC structure, so now we would purchase that land with the SDC funds that we're collecting from all the developments. But there's no trigger in our code yet to require them to put that land available to the city to purchase. So that's a small fix we need to make in the code that, again, I'd completely forgotten about until earlier today. So there's things like that that we need to continue to push and do. So it's good to go through those policies again and make sure that our code's going to reflect as much of this as we can.
Do we want to move on to the code?
Yeah, just one thought, and that green space could include things like pathways for pedestrian and bike transportation through different routes, not along streets.
Yeah.
Just all kinds of things, not just that, much broader. Okay.
So this is just the section of the code that we worked on for residential districts, not commercial, public, or any of the other sections. I think the changes we made mostly fall within some language around cottage clusters, because we didn't have any language to handle that, and also creating. Go ahead, sir.
Can you back up a little bit?
Yeah.
And recap exactly what this is, where it came from,
Sure.
what it is, if there's changes or track changes available, that's just kind of the big picture.
Sure. So, in our code as it currently exists, it gives sections for residential districts, commercial districts, public lands, things like that. And so this is the residential section with edits included that I and Chris have been working on. There's the areas that have been changed are the lot standards. So section 183540.
Well, in the first section, so 183510 purpose. B, C, D are reflective of the current comprehensive plan policies. Each of those items under purpose coordinate with the first four goals. I didn't include the funding side of things, the last one, just because it's, again, that's tough to handle. That's a little bit different policy than what would fit into the development. The A, B, C, and D essentially reflect the current goals within the current comprehensive plan. I thought that was appropriate. So those have been completely rewritten, essentially all but copied and pasted out of the comp plan with a few edits just to make them a little bit better. So that's new. 183520 residential zoning district. The current code, and we didn't do the track changes because there's so many changes that I think it would have gotten in the way. So this was a little cleaner. So we will just kind of explain them. And 183520, side note here too, we're using this current numbering system. This whole numbering system is going to get reworked. So we'll use it as we're referencing, but when everything gets finalized, we're going to go back through and renumber all of the segments to make them make sense. But for now, we're trying to keep them similar to what's in the current code so that we can track it a little bit easier. So don't give too much attention if we go from like 183520 to 183540. That just means there's a section that we pulled out that in track changes will show up as deleted, but we've just
pushed it back behind 50.
Yeah, and we just didn't renumber it because we just haven't worried about the numbers at this point. So don't get lost if the numbers are inaccurate. We know that they are. We just aren't spending a lot of staff time there because we'll just have to redo them again in the future anyway. So, okay. All that said, so 183520, we really just simplify this down. The current code, we actually break down and we have an allowed use table for all the residential. We've gone away from that, and now we've got one allowed use table at the beginning of the entire zoning section. So that's kind of been omitted at this point. We're not going to talk about the allowed uses within the residential zones, but we did want to provide a summary of what are the residential zones, because in the allowed use table, we don't go into a lot of detail about what is C1, what's C2, C3. We just say what's allowed in C1, C2, C3, and R1, R2, R3. So here, we thought let's at least define what those residential zones are in very simplistic terms, just so you get an idea of what you're looking at. So in the R1, which is similar to current, single-family dwelling units or single dwelling units would be allowed, and duplexes would be allowed on the corner lots. We had some discussion about that. We're happy to get feedback on that. We did talk about an additional provision that would show up later in the code that says if you are going to put a duplex on a corner lot, you have to have the separate entrances, take their access from the different streets. So you end up with more like a corner lot duplex with each side of the street taking a unit, as opposed to having a side by side that faces one street and the other street just gets a side view.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, it should be noted that corner lots are permissible in the existing code, right? Yeah, in R1. So, if we want to change that, that's certainly something I think that we should discuss, but that is the code.
Is that different in the medium density residential? The duplex wouldn't necessarily, even if it landed on a corner, it wouldn't necessarily have to have that.
it would not. So currently doesn't. And the provision of having it take separate accesses on separate roads, that would be a new provision for the R1. That's not something that we currently require.
So, pulling back to high level.
Yeah.
I guess, two things, go ahead and finish the very quick overview, but then, and then tell us what we hope to accomplish tonight.
So, the next section after this, is the lot standards table, residential district table, and, a lot of what we can do tonight is probably lives and breathes out of this, because none of these numbers are set in stone. They're some of it is from the old code, some of it is stuff we've updated, but you can see in the top row here, we have our R1, R2, and R3 districts, and then below it we break down by certain housing types, and we have different standards depending on the housing type and depending the district that it's in. And we just try to consolidate all that into this table here, so it's at least an easy reference. Going below that, we have different standards for things like architectural standards. We have building height, building orientation. I mentioned before that we added some language for cottage clusters, just because we didn't have any existing language in the old code to address them. And yeah, as it currently exists, I think we've been fairly conservative with the scalpel when it comes to the old code, given that we didn't want to just import code from a neighboring community, and it's easier to start with what we have. Probably the biggest changes are in this lot standards section, and I guess when it comes to what we'd like to, I mean, for one, just to get your feedback to see if this is a direction that's appropriate to move in, if we're meeting our goals and requirements per LBCD. And if there are any, thoughts, additions, critiques, that's what we're here for.
So, from the planning commission, any thoughts about what you've brought to the table tonight? We just want to go through it piece by piece, or does anybody want to have any process conversation before we start?
Process maybe, in that, like this, I mean, what we got was in front of us. I guess for me anyway, it would help if, as far as, I guess from the angle of what we get out of it is, like, what do you were mentioning the, plan, or not the plan, but the comp plan. And, if we've got a memo and it said, take a look at the comp plan, and then starting with the residential districts,
see if we're addressing those issues that are in the comp plan in here. Now, maybe I should have just intuitively just figured that out, but I didn't. So I was just reading and looking at things like, well, this doesn't make sense or that does. And that's all I have for myself tonight. So,
Which is fine also.
I'll make a note to forward a memo for items in the
yeah,
future.
well,
for
yeah,
just
if you
to
just,
clarify.
yeah, just, what do you want us to figure out, I guess? Because I'm saying it right.
I agree with Grace that we need to get into that table. Because I do have a lot of notes, but a lot of notes are editorial, but some are actually of some substance. But that table is where we have to, starting to help along the process in order to meet the criteria of the prior document. So I think we need to just get into it, and I can see spending quite a bit of time just on that table, because it's gonna drive everything else.
Yeah, and to that point, Chase added the section on cottage cluster because it was not in our code at all, so that's new. Later in the section, the other of it's been pretty cursory until we got this, because this is gonna impact
Everything else.
all of the other stuff, right? So we really didn't make a lot of revisions, and again, there's no track change there. We didn't make a lot of revisions to the rest of this, other than adding cottage cluster. Because we did kind of want the focus tonight to be on that table and what's there. And
Sounds good.
again, is what you've read through, if there's things in there that you've read and noted on, we'll take that feedback as well, so that next version of the changes, we can incorporate those.
And I apologize for the lack of track changes, but it's a sacrifice of legibility towards the amount of information. And I figured it's better to give you something readable.
In this case, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Being a champion of track changes. I agree with what you've done on that.
So you want to look first?
Let's look at the table.
I'm gonna jump in first thing and just say that one of the omissions here, and it was by accident, is in the R2, you'll notice it starts with the R2A duplex. We really do need to have a column in front of that for an R2A single unit, single dwelling unit. Because single dwelling units are allowed in the R2, we just omitted it. So in your mind, or everyone, add a column in there, and it's going to have its own square footage, minimums, and all that stuff. We kind of missed it and started with duplex instead of starting with the unit.
Good question. Why, if part of the thing is to have higher densities, why do you want to allow a single family dwelling in a medium residential area?
Well,
That's
I
one thing.
brought that up last week because I like the idea of having a zone where you can much smaller lots and smaller houses.
Oh,
It'd still be
single
family.
And still be single family, because that is a large part of what people want. They want to buy a house that they don't have any wall neighbors, and they've got a yard with stairs, and they've got a fenced yard where the dog lives, and whatever it is.
did I miss a meeting last week?
2 weeks ago.
What did I say last week?
He said that's it. You are tired.
I am. That's why I started with it.
The other component of that is looking at the current zoning map and the proposed zoning map that we've looked at a little bit already. We don't necessarily want to get a situation where we've created any more non-conforming existing than what we have to. We're gonna have some of that, but there's large splotches of area that we plan to play R2 that is single unit detached housing. And it would be painful in a lot of ways to have a code that just says this is supposed to be all multifamily, duplex, triplex, townhome, and just ignore the fact that 90% of it is all. So we want to reflect what's actually currently in the ground right now.
Probably among the more substantial changes that were made would bring down the minimum lot requirements for most of these districts. Okay.
We didn't vote on that, right? You guys just changed it.
We just changed it. I wanted to get your feedback because that's.
I
some
knew
of
we
the-
discussed it, yeah, from
Some of them-
6 to 5, right, on the minimum?
Currently it's 7 in the R1.
No.
So if we start in just R1, maybe let's just focus those two columns in the R1 for
Okay.
single unit and duplex. Our current is 7,000 minimum lot size. And for a duplex, it's gotta be on a corner lot and it's gotta be at least 10,000 square feet. So we've reduced those down to 5,000 square foot minimum lot and a 7,000 minimum for the corner duplex.
5.
This may be a naive question, but should there be a maximum lot size?
There is a maximum lot size.
It's not there.
It's not in here.
Is there not?
Maximum.
In the previous, it was like 150% of the.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot. I must have forgot a row.
Yeah, we talked about it.
Yeah, it's not there.
And
In the discussions, we talked about for the R1 and the duplex, for the R1 single unit, we like the idea of still being able to keep it up to, right now it's 10,500. It's 150% more than the minimum. We like the idea of doubling that, making it 200 times greater than the minimum, so you could go between 5,000 to 10,000 square lots. So we're not reducing the maximum size of the lot, we're just reducing the minimum size of the lot. So a developer could choose if they wanted smaller 5,000 square foot lots, or they wanted to provide some larger lots that would allow for some larger homes or a different style of a home.
Well, that plays into something I really wanted to bring up, because I looked at several non-conforming lots inside these districts. And with the old minimum and 150% maximum, there was pretty much nothing you could do with it. You couldn't really, just even ADUs or splitting it in half and making two lots, because with the minimum and max being so tight, it really didn't leave you any room for flexibility. So I think having a double is a way better proportion to make a lot of different lots make sense.
Well, we talked, and the idea would be that the maximum lot sizes remain roughly the same. Wanted more flexibility for people to build smaller partition lots, smaller.
One of the comments that I have with the maximum is that, especially in R1, where you end up with individual R1s, a lot of time is on property that's not as easily buildable. And, I'm sitting on a 9,400 square foot lot. And I had to really work to get what I wanted on that lot because of the topography and the like of the lot. And in particular, that particular area has multiple lots that have got that kind of problem. And I understand historically, correct me if I'm wrong, that entire area was replatted with the lots were larger at one time and they were made smaller.
Yes, so they could get more lots in there, yes.
And that was the developer's driver?
Yes.
Okay, so he did it for financial reasons.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I'm, even at 10,000 square feet on some of these lots, I would feel far more comfortable with something closer to 14, 15,000 square feet. The reality is a developer going in there is gonna make those lots as economical as he can. Okay? And I don't see them very often going up into the larger size of lots unless they're looking at a particular market that's going to allow that's gonna drive that particular size lot. But I think coming into this at 10,000 or 10,500 square feet is a little bit on the tight side. If you're in a flat plain, I get it. And,
Even then, you have lots with like wetlands and those sorts of things.
yeah,
that
so
restrict.
I have no problem whatsoever with the 5,000, and that's a 50 by 100 lot. That's a pretty small lot, but it's still a very doable lot for R1 residential. But I would look at seriously in the R1 in particular that we go larger. Actually, in some ways, the other ones as well. when we get into multi-housing.
I would just counter that by saying, you know, the whole objective of this is to make more room for more houses. So allowing a larger maximum doesn't make sense to me. However, I recognize the issues you're talking about, and it seems to me like there should be some limitations for land that is not buildable. And perhaps there is, I don't know that, but because of the slope or because of wetlands or, I think those are the
Probably the two biggest ones.
Commissioner Green, did you have a?
I just need to see what a 5,000 square foot lot looks like, cause to me it just sounds small, but I guess it depends on the size of the house.
You know, I'm a little more familiar with acreage, and that's 0.11 acres. So a lot of the lots on College Street are bigger than that. 0.15 is real common.
If we're gonna go small, why not, and if we wanna do single family in R2, why wouldn't we just bump that over to R2 and leave the R1 where it's at? You know what I'm saying? Like, am I making sense? Sorry if I don't.
No, you make sense.
Or bump it down 1,000, and then the 5,000 would be the single dwelling in R2. You know what I mean? Like kind of a.
Well, as an initial draft, we dropped, I think, all of the requirements simply because we're just trying to increase density.
Right.
Generally. I mean, how we wanna parse this out is why we're here.
Yeah.
But I do, I mean, in the case of the R1, I mean, I will say that I know other cities do have, low density residential districts in that range. And just because that's the minimum doesn't mean that people have to build to.
Yeah.
It's just,
But it does mean a developer could come in and take the minimum, and if we're doing, and the side yard setback, for some reason, I don't like anything below 6 feet. I feel like 5 feet isn't big enough. And then they're just crammed into each other. I don't know, you put a fence in, then you put a gate in, and then you can't get a trash can through the gate because it's at 5 feet and not 6 feet, and that's just where it's up. Cause I have a tiny side yard, that was one of our things, is I had to make the gate just big enough to get the trash can through. That's all the room we have, so. That was another one, but yeah, I guess just the understanding of why we would lower the R1 so much, but we'd also have a single family in R2, I guess distinguishing between the two, I need more clarity on. That's it. My comments.
what is the minimum, lot size in the R2 single family? Is it 5?
it's 4,000. Yeah. Sorry, I had a thought, but relevant one, but it's completely gone.
I want to respond to Commissioner Oates' comment about those lots, and I think where there's the exception, where you've got slopes, you've got a wetland issue, the code does allow for variances for larger lots. You just have to show that it's because of a slope or so you want a bigger backyard. But where there are natural constraints, the code does allow for larger lots, even at the subdivision approval stage. The code for averaging as well, and so you're gonna have some that could be 12,000 and some that are gonna be smaller than that, depending on the topography and constraints. And so that's one way around it. Subdivisions can also, separate out slopes and make those separate tracks where they're not even part of the lot in itself. That, up there it was chosen to have every lot have a portion of that slope as part of their square footage for their lot, but then every lot was allowed to be much, much larger. You could just as easily have created a tract for that slope and then have each of the lots just be a standard size. So I think the code allows a lot of flexibility when you have those constraints. But I appreciate Sir Causey's comments that really this is about how do you make housing more affordable in Philomath, is that you make everybody make a little bit more room by everybody squeezing out just a little bit, or allowing the option for them to squeeze down a little. So you can do a single family home up on the hillside or down in these new cul-de-sacs that are getting developed or in these new areas that are having that growth for low density residential and you can go down to 5,000 square feet, you're gonna get a lot more single unit residential development in there that otherwise you can't do at 5,000 square feet because your minimum is still at 7 or at 6. So it does allow for additional housing to go in the city residential zone you otherwise won't get. So there's pros and cons to it, for sure. I mean, at the end of the day, we'd all love to live on a half an acre lot in town.
That ain't happening.
Afford the utilities at that rate, right? You need to get as many people in on that street as possible.
So, but if the market conditions are gonna drive developers to make small lot, the question is, what should the maximum be? Such that if there's a neighborhood that the developer wants to build a little bit bigger houses, what is too big for the city of Philomath, and say, no, you can't do that, as opposed to.
And I believe up to 10,000 square foot lots, that's a good sized lot with a good sized home on it, so.
4 per acre, okay.
And with the,
What's that?
4 per acre.
4 per acre.
yeah, with the addition that you could add some variance for, slopes and wetlands and other things that maybe have additional constraints on there as a variance to an exception, right, not the rule.
A class C variance in our code is the kind of variance, you all encountered in a meeting a few weeks back with the gentleman who'd come in. And that's the variance type that handles any topographic, constraints, barriers. And, I think if we wanna take a long look at that, with regards to especially these issues, because just today we were having a pre-conference meeting with somebody who wants to develop low-density housing, but there's a lot of slope, and
And what is the application fee for that variance?
I don't know.
It's a pretty low bar.
The class C, it comes to the planning commission, it's $2,000.
Yeah. If you're a developer, it's not much.
Yeah.
If you're single family, if you're a single, if you're in it might be a little.
Well, I guess after hearing what Chris described as far as the variances for them, I'm fine with this 5 and 10 on the, starting with the R1. And then I assume the duplex would be 7 and 14. Or,
So you're saying minimum and maximum?
yeah, mid-max. Is that for the duplex? Is that double also?
I think you'd have to. It could come down a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know why you would go to 14.
I mean, I think you go 12 or.
Oh, I would, where it's not on here, I was just asking what
Yeah.
did you guys put?
I think 12. If you can't fit it on the 12, then you need to divide it and just make 2 separate houses,
I have a comment on from these first columns. It's the maximum lot coverage. Where'd that number come from? Considering it's 35% right now.
In the existing code, it's 35?
No, yeah.
For R1?
What I gave you today, it's 35%. It's an R1 lot. So I've been in it lately.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But, you do have to make, if you're looking at a 5,000 square foot lot in a more urban environment, 50 by 100 lot, or a 40 by 120 lot are pretty standard historical lots post World War II in an urban environment where there wasn't a lot of land. I'm talking subdivisions in the old cities in the Los Angeles area, the Bay Area, and other. That's a fairly standard lot. And the 5-foot setbacks are very, very standard universally throughout the country. Especially when you're looking at let's take the 50 by 100 foot lot. You end up with 5-foot setbacks on either side, and you're doing a single story house, so you're not having to deal with an additional foot setback. I think that's the way our code reads. I'll have to go back and look at it. But I'm familiar with codes that if you go 2-story, you got to add an extra foot in the side yard. So in that case, you're down to 38 feet if you do a 2-story house. And then when you go to your depth, you're going to be looking at 20 feet in the front, because chances are you're going to have a front-loaded street unless they're gonna be developing alleys. So you're gonna end up with a 20-foot setback in the front. Yeah, part of it might come up to 20 feet. Some might come up to 15 feet, but the garage has to be set at 20 feet, and you're sitting at 15 feet in the rear. So you got 100, what is that? That's 35 feet. So you're down to 65 feet in depth. So even if we took that as a calculation and they built out all to that line, that should be where the percentage should be.
That's a 40 by 45, which would be 1,800 square feet, which would be 36%.
Yeah. I think it's deep. I'll have to go back and run the number, but yeah, okay. I think it's a little bit higher than that. I think it's closer to, I think if you do, let's make it a single story. It's 40 by 65. So that's gonna be 1,200,
you're right,
that's gonna
60.
be what, is it 1,280?
I said 40.
Is my math right? You can take 1,280 divided by the 5,000. I said, but that's the other thing too. Do we want houses? Do we want them to put that much house on that lot and push it so that it basically it's to the setback all the way around?
52%.
That's 52%. Okay. So that's a real question we've got. I mean, there are advantages and disadvantages of that. And the reality is, and again, in more urban environments right now, that's what they're doing with housing. It's 6-foot side yards. Usually the backyard, ours is 15 here. Most jurisdictions I'm familiar with is 20 in the back. So we're a little more, conservative as far as allowing the person to do something. So we just have to think about whether that's the environment we want. In an R1, when we move into an R2, I'm gonna argue with you, you go all the way to the setbacks and you go up as much as you can on a single family. And we should set it up to do that in the R2 environment for a single family. But in the R1 environment, we need to make a differentiation why it's gonna be R1 versus R2. Because if the result is houses in both zones all the way to the
Right,
setbacks.
they're all crammed together, then.
Yeah,
What's the beauty of R1 then,
Right.
Yeah.
They might not-
So
they might as well-
that's
you.
where my argument is with that.
Yes, that is what I was trying.
Using that logic and that mathematics, the 52%, are you comfortable there? If you say you're gonna max out your building envelope to allow for your side yard setbacks,
In an R1,
front yard setback and backyard setback.
I think it has to be lower. I'd be looking at the upper 40s, probably.
45% or something.
45%, yeah. I mean, it's 35 now, and they go to 45. And then you look at like the lot that I have, it's on a corner, that you have the 15-foot setbacks on 2 streets.
Probably
We're
20.
almost making a lot unbuildable. I'd have to go run the calculations. The lot would probably be unbuildable with that holding that percentage.
So on your,
You just couldn't reach that percentage.
Yeah.
on your 50 by 100 lot that you described, where would you want the extra room? Do you want the extra room on the sides?
No, I would leave it as part of the design of the building.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
You have minimums all the way around, and then you can design
right.
to this, but you can't touch all 4.
And I don't remember on our setbacks, on our side yard setbacks, yeah, we don't talk about adding an extra foot if we go up 2 stories. Which helps with the lighting and the ventilation and everything else and just the massing. We don't have that currently in our code, but that's in my past work, it's very common.
We do for commercial districts, but nothing in the residential.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it's a foot. And it makes a difference. So instead of 40 foot, you now got 38 feet to deal with. You can still design a house for 38. You can also do a house if you're dealing with a 40 by 120. You could do a house at 32 feet very nicely. You get much narrower than 32 feet. You can't design a house for that lot.
Does part E, you're looking at the page, you're over the page from the table, right? Does part E address that?
special yard. I was very confused by that. I don't understand what we're trying, I get what we're trying to say, but I don't get any real direction as a designer.
Is more for like a accessory dwelling unit going on the lot.
Oh,
How
okay.
much space between buildings?
Two buildings on the same lot.
Not neighbors, okay.
Or
They did two,
So
and then it's all on the second guy.
you guys are,
Yeah, you don't wanna do that.
Right, right.
you're talking about the maximum lot coverage, so the numbers down here at the bottom aren't even right.
Take it as a placeholder right now, and we're talking about it.
80%.
I know,
And that
but take it as a placeholder, and that's why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
That's what he put it there, it's a placeholder. So, that's, again, jumping to a single family and an R2, go all the way to the setbacks, go for it. But once again, if you go up, I would pull the side yard setback in a foot to go up a second story.
I'm just gonna push back on that just a little more, like if you feel like it's too close, then why not just change the setback as opposed to let the developer choose which setback they're going to infringe on more than what you feel comfortable from a design standpoint.
Because
It's not enough backyard.
as a designer, I'm gonna design a building that may have a corner in it, and maybe this or that. Or it may make sense for that particular lot, for me and for the particular client, that the house is a little bit narrower, but more linear, goes back further. And for this particular, because for some reason, they like to have a side yard, they like to be able to enter the house partway down a side yard, come through a gate. And that's the kind of feeling that they want. You take another client or developer and it's gonna say, okay, you want the front door, it's gonna face the street. And that's one of the things that we put exception to. They face the street, and then you want to give it as wide a house as you can on that lot to give you the largest rectangular or closer to square as possible backyard. And so it all depends. And
And I think it also brings variability to a neighborhood.
yes,
You know,
yeah, because then we don't end up with ticky-tacky boxes.
Yeah, if they're constrained, kind of constrain every house to be like in the same position.
Well,
There's a little variability.
This is the maximum lot size though, it's not the minimum, it's the maximum lot coverage, so you can build a house that's smaller and off to the side or smaller and in the back.
But then we're also looking at the economics of a house, because the lot I'm talking about, you're looking at a single-family house in an R1 is 1,280 square feet. And that's including the area for the garage.
First floor.
So if I take out 400 square feet for the garage, I got a first floor of 800 square feet, which is pretty small, which means I am gonna go up 2 stories. Pretty much a given, even though you could do an 800 square foot house. We don't have, certain developments in this city has minimum square footage requirements of building.
Well, it's kind of making my argument though, is if you're gonna reduce your lot size from 7 to 5, now you've got less lot to deal with. And if you're gonna keep your buildable maximum lot coverage at the 30 or 40%, your envelope to build on has just gotten that much smaller even still. So now you are having to build a small house. If you increase the maximum lot coverage to closer to 50%, now you can have a larger home on that smaller lot than if you keep it the same. So I think you give yourself more flexibility by having a larger minimum lot coverage.
I understand what you're saying, and I can concur with what you're saying.
You're essentially saying if you're gonna develop at that 5,000 square foot, and you also have a maximum lot coverage of 30%,
That's not gonna
your envelope has just gotten very, very small. And so now we're disincentivizing that 5,000 square foot lot. We've just backward we were trying to do, which is to get more lots in there. Now we're gonna discourage it because you can only fit a 900 square foot first floor on
We're
it.
gonna have some developer's gonna walk in there, and he's gonna put up 20 houses all the way at that 50%. And I don't know how we control that, because I totally get what you're saying. is it gives some flexibility in that maximum.
You guys were talking earlier about, the two of you, about having the single family and the R2 different than the R1. So
Yeah.
if you put, say, had 45 in the R1 for a single,
Do 80%.
and do, I don't know, what would the number be in R2 that you could do using these setbacks? I guess that, you'd need to know that so that you could actually have a difference, I guess is what I'm trying to provide that difference.
Yeah, there should be a difference between an R1 and R2.
Right, isn't that how you decide it would be different? Or would you change the setbacks from one to the other? Or just do the line cover?
Let's ignore my extra foot right now.
Well, no, yeah.
It's kind of confusing. I think
Yeah,
I've
no,
created
I don't
a
mean
issue.
that, but if you, I mean, couldn't you?
If you had a 40 by 100 lot, okay, which is a 4,000 square foot lot, and you're almost, if you're gonna do a 4,000 square foot single family lot, you're gonna do a 40 by 100. You're not gonna do anything narrower. You might do something a little bit wider.
We dropped to 38 was kind of a minimum for the frontage, street frontage, just to allow,
38 as far as the building itself
no, 38
was the lot.
was the lot.
Yeah, and then with 5 foot setbacks, you were down to 28-foot wide building, which is a really narrow building.
That's
A
the
large
minimum.
double wide.
My dream house.
So
Coverage
you have 4,000 square feet, okay? And if you have, again, the setbacks, so you're gonna end up with a building, you got 5 foot. And in some jurisdictions, they go down to the actual side yards to get smaller in an R2, where instead of being 5 foot, it's down to 10% of the width of the lot. So now you end up with 2 4-foots. I don't know if we wanna go there. But let's assume with 5 foot, we're dealing at 30 by 65, which is what? No, my math right? Yeah, 30 by 65. No.
1950.
You said 55? No, it's 100 minus 15 minus 20, that's 35, it's 65. So that's 1,950 square feet. I think the numbers we were using before were the other. Divide that by 4,000. Yeah, if you allow 48%, you would be taking it all the way to the property, all the way to the setbacks
For that one.
for that one.
48, so it's only 3% different?
No, we need to rerun the other numbers. Something didn't get.
Are there any city planning textbooks or reference books that really have numbers and charts and graphs about what the effects of these various things are that would, like, somebody who studied this?
See, that's 2,600 square feet.
I was originally gonna include, an article that had pictures visualizing different densities and setbacks, and I might.
Yeah,
get
20 by 20
material
garage is a
that
tight garage,
can
that's
use
400
on
square
it,
feet.
just to help.
Love a
Two
good
car.
visual aid.
Yeah, I mean, and it can show, this is what, 5 units, 9 units, 10, 24, whatever per acre looks like. It might help some of this.
There's also a book called Graphic Standards. It's been around for over a century. But I'll see if I can pull some stuff out of that goes into a lot of detail.
And I think that would be helpful for us as a planning commission, but it's probably also would be helpful when we get to a public meeting.
Yeah, right. And at some point, it comes down to what do you want it to look like and how do you want it to function, right?
Yeah.
And
But it's a big jump to go from the numbers on page to a mental map for any of us, let alone.
so the one most people are gonna be familiar with, so Mill Pond Crosby, those lots are just over 5,000 square foot. Those are 5,200 square foot. They have a 36 to 40 foot frontage depending on the lot. So most of them are under 40 foot frontage and then they drop back 120 feet or whatever it is. So,
And that's R1 there.
that's R3, but, they were allowed to go down to the 5,000 square foot lots, but it had to be detached units. We don't want any duplexes, triplexes than that was originally approved, so.
But those have pretty generous backyards.
Nice sized front yards, cause we required a 40-foot driveway in front of the garage so that we didn't have the on-street parking issues. We wanted 4 parking spaces in front of the garage. So we required 40-foot driveways, and they all have, pretty generous backyards, cause they're very deep. That's just a different style of house that they're narrow. It's not a long rancher. It's a very narrow house.
And what's, the typical square footage of those houses is?
Good luck. I think they're in the 18 to 25. I think some of them get up to 25 plus. Yeah.
And they're two-story, which means
Two-story, yeah.
they pull it in. They pull it in from the corners, and that gives you more wind
And personally, when I
1,000-ish square feet.
drive down 15th
1,000 or so square feet.
on the ground
On the
floor.
ground.
Yeah, livable.
You know, I think those are perfectly reasonable.
when I drive down 15th, they don't feel cramped. I wish the color choices had been different on the homes. Trees out on the street, but as you drive down, it doesn't feel like a medium density residential that things are tight. I mean, it feels like, again, there could have been some more creative architectural things been done, but the homes don't feel like they're on top of each other. They're laid out, and they have side yards, and they have nice front yards and decent sized backyards, and
Slightly bigger than the minimum requirements here.
yeah, I mean, 200
They are kind of cookie cutter, but
they are, but that's architectural design and other things that could be
And that's cost savings.
affordable housing.
I got one more comment. The maximum depth, where you get the 3 times the minimum. That means it's only a 114-foot deep lot.
So that's the minimum,
No, I'm talking about maximum depth.
maximum depth.
You have the minimum width.
No,
Well,
3 times.
You had minimum width here of 38, and then you said your maximum depth is 3 times the minimum width.
Does that mean 3 times the minimum width in the code, or 3 times the narrowest width of the lot as it's laid out?
A lot as it's laid out. So if you've got a wide frontage, then you can't have more than 3 times
Okay,
that
there
deep.
needs to be an asterisk on this indicating that the maximum depth is minimum of the width of the lot, not of the minimum width.
Actual width.
It doesn't, yeah, the actual width instead of
The
minimum
actual
width.
minimum.
It should be
is
3 times the
lots are-
width.
Oh,
There you go.
not,
I don't know what you're thinking, one of us could get the right word.
so if you just add the word actual, or,
Well, get rid of minimum.
no, I think you can further.
in the statement.
But if your lot's variable width,
So if your lot is a 50-foot lot, then you can go back 150 feet maximum.
would it be horrible to go with the average width of the lot, 3 times the average width?
There's where we get, there's a lot of challenges in these codes too. You end up with a pie-shaped lot, you're gonna have to take the average.
Yeah.
You have no choice.
There's code language that'll apply.
Yeah.
3 times the lot width.
The nominal lot, but you can add that word in there, and then we take care of the pie-shaped lot. I'm sorry.
Be good clarification.
And honestly, that was kind of eyeballing it, going,
Yeah,
if you're this near, like, how long do you really want these things to get, right? So if you can have a maximum lot size of 10,000 square foot, and you got a 38-foot frontage, that gets real funky looking and hard to develop around. So you can be on a 10,000 square foot lot, but you're not gonna be a cylinder, right? You're gonna have to have some frontage in order to get that depth.
So,
You need to say maximum lot depth or just maximum depth?
you're talking about, all these are dimensions of the lot,
Yeah, they're all on.
having to do with lot.
did any of this apply to all the existing lots that are out there that are oddball, that could be split into multiple lots? Does somebody have to come and ask for a variance to not meet these standards when they've got I mean, there's quite a few 4-acre lots around here and there that clearly could be developed, but they're difficult to meet these criteria. I assume to split a big lot, you have to meet these criteria or get a variance. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, both lots would have to meet the criteria.
And I did look at a couple that were a challenge with the, a challenge with the old numbers. I'd have to look at the new numbers. It's probably better now with that double.
One area that I wanted to draw a little attention to is top row for R3 is we added a minimum units per acre of 24.
At the minimum or
That's
maximum?
minimum?
A minimum of 24 per acre.
I'm not dogmatic about 24. That I think there's arguments for that number to be lower or higher, honestly, depending the kind of development that's being proposed. But I do think there's probably good arguments for having a minimum density requirement for our R3.
That's the number that was recommended by Eco Northwest when they did our housing needs analysis, was that when you have an R3, I think they were a little disgusted that we had R3 that was allowing single unit development. Although it had a development agreement that you have all of this high density residential and it's full of single unit housing. And it was like, well, yeah, because we allowed for the 5,000 square foot lots. Like, well, just lower your minimum. So anyway, the intent there is, and we're skipping through R2 a little bit, but we'll go ahead and go there with the R3. And I've said this before, when we plan for R3 high density residential, and we're upsizing water lines and upsizing sewer lines and making sure that we've got the utilities to handle R3, we want to ensure that the developer builds high density multifamily housing in there. And that they don't say, well, we can't just build some 3,000 square foot lot, single homes here, and this what we want to do, this is what we build, this is what we're going to do. We lose out. We've done all that infrastructure upgrading, and we're not getting the payback from it with the number of units that we want. So it's really a matter of targeting that on the map. We want to put the multifamily high density housing, and then requiring that per acre there. And again, that 24 is coming right from Eco Northwest. That was the number they recommended.
And so those would automatic, well, I guess you could, if you only had 1 acre, you'd have to put 24 units on it. But I mean, say, like Boulevard, does that meet that requirement? It's a pretty standard number, I guess.
You're essentially looking at a 3-story complex. A 2-story, you probably wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, you wouldn't even be able to.
Well, without the parking requirements, you might be. I'd have to look at it without the parking requirements. But,
No parking.
Hey, we stayed away from the.
Well, like I say, just there now,
meet that.
also on 19.
How does that work with the minimum lot size? With 3,000 square foot, that would require 2 units on that. Does that make any sense at all?
Which one are we talking about?
R3.
3,000 square
The
foot.
minimum lot size is 3,000 square feet, and if you do the math, it requires 1.6 minimum. So what do 2 units look like on a 3,000 square foot lot? Is that?
Yeah, I don't know that number.
Doesn't work at all.
We'll work that math out. It's on the 24 right now.
All right. Just asking. I'm trying to get my.
No, it's the right question.
I'm going to jump back to the R1 real quick. One number we haven't talked about yet, but I want to make sure that we recognize what's come from. Our current street frontage in the R1 is 16 feet.
1/6.
1/6. That's the required street frontage for a lot in the R1.
That's not a flag lot.
It ends up creating a flag lot.
Right.
That's what it does, is it allows for flag lots. So you'll have an existing home, and you got a little area in the back, and so you siphon off 16 feet along the side and create a flag and a driveway that then can get you back to your back by the property home on it. flag lots more difficult to do. There's pros and cons to that. The cons are that it's gonna remove some of the infill that we may want to see in some of our existing R1 low density. But it also gets away from new development that comes in and tries to piecemeal and sandwich residential housing in any which way they can do it by the use of flag lots and 16-foot frontages. Or the end of a cul-de-sac where everybody has shared driveways of some sort or another because everybody only has to have the 16 foot of frontage, and so you end up with 6 units or 8 units coming off the end of a cul-de-sac. So there's some problems that a 16-foot frontage creates that we can avoid by widening that out. I'm all for infill, but I am not a fan of flag lots. They're problematic, they're troublesome, they tend to have lower values. You know, it's a hard, I think separate from an accessory dwelling unit, a flag lot just is a harder property to sell. So they have lower values, they tend to diminish the value of the properties around them because where you used to have backyard to backyard, now you've got this weird house that is this the front or is this the front, and depending on how the owner wants to do it, we kind of justify it, which is the front, but you end up with side yards to backyards, and they just end up being awkward. I've never done a flag lot, that's a perfect fit. There's not one, and so at the expense of some infill that may be beneficial, I think we do ourselves better in forcing good development by keeping that 38-foot frontage and requiring houses to front the street. And even if you've got access to the back and there's other ways to make it look, but to me, we're gonna get a much more uniform look. And the challenge to that, I won't call out names, but I will call it subdivisions. Drive up 9th Street and take a left on Quail Glen, and you'll see the haphazardness that those homes are in there because of the use of flag lots, mid-block lanes, and others. And it's a different look and feel to that neighborhood completely than if you go up one more street to like Maryland and you look at all the houses that front that street, and it feels like a more uniform kind of cul-de-sac street or through street.
How many, in the areas that we currently have as R1, how many existing lots do you think are out there that could possibly be split using a flag lot technology?
It doesn't.
Do you think there's that many?
Yeah.
But I think
Because that's my only
Yeah.
hesitation.
But if we drop to 5,000 square feet, there's substantially more than that, and I don't even have a number of that.
But there's also a lot in R2.
Yes.
There's a lot of lots in R2 that could be, I mean.
Yeah, of
there's
course.
0.4, lots of 0.4 acre lots.
That could be turned into flag lots.
That could be turned into flag lots or maybe better redeveloped into
What's
something.
the general size of those lots? I mean, are we talking pretty square, or we're talking?
Yeah, almost square.
Almost square.
A little bit deeper than width, but.
The narrower width lets you get along the side of the house, right? What's now a 10-foot side yard or a 10-foot setback
Right.
turns into a driveway, right, to get back to and access the back property. It's gonna be 16 feet. And it's 16 feet of the street, and sometimes I've seen those be 16 feet of the street and then they narrow to the minimum driveway width, and then they widen out at the end
12
again.
feet, they're down to 12 or whatever it is.
So I think there's a place for the homes like in the RT you're referring to, duplexes, townhomes. I mean, there's other ways to carve that up than to say we're going to do a separate tax lot with a 16-foot front.
Right.
So, and in fact, in a lot of ways, I would encourage the townhome or the duplex as opposed to the separate tax lot. So that's the reason for the 38. We kind of kept it consistent across until you get up to the townhomes, and you can see that it does drop down to the 20. So in the case like where you're talking, a little townhouse then, so connect it, right? Instead of having a separate single unit, connect it as a townhome, but now you only need 20 feet and 20 feet.
Yeah.
But both of them are fronting the street. You don't have one tucked back behind and hiding back in a backyard. So it changes the feel.
Another question of what that does to existing usage on those existing flag lots. Say that house which goes away. Lot is kind of an existing non-conforming lot.
Yeah.
Does that constrain its development, or what's that process? Do we need some language in the code to kind of address that?
We have language in the code now about pre-existing non-conforming, and that use can continue as long as it's continuous. If the use.
This is just done and it's gotta be destroyed.
It can be rebuilt.
Can be
Yeah, you can rebuild similar. You couldn't rebuild a duplex there, but you could rebuild, if it wasn't otherwise allowed, but you could rebuild a single unit dwelling there in its place. I think our code says you gotta have to submit building plans within 6 months or something.
But if it's in an R2, and it'd be a perfect triplex on a flag lot, because it's just, would that be allowed?
Yeah, build a triplex. Yeah, you'd be able to build anything up to code.
Up to code.
If you want to build something that was not allowed by the code.
It's
You could
just,
rebuild
the fact that the lot couldn't be created by code doesn't necessarily constrain what could be done on it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
About heights, is 25 feet, is that a single-story home?
That's 2-story, and yeah, you typically floor to floor, minimum floor to floor is about 9 feet. But most houses today are using 9-foot ceilings, 10 feet. And so you end up with, that's 20 feet for a 2-story, and then when you start dealing with the roof pitches, and all, you may not even be able to get a 2-story at 25 feet.
My very old 2-story on College Street is just under 20.
Yeah, but you're fairly narrow.
Fairly narrow, steep pitched, and then chopped off top of the roof.
Yeah, they
It's
saw
kind
it
of weird
wrong.
thing.
Why would you
Instead
do
of 25
that?
feet.
It was done over 100 years ago, I have no idea.
Had to stand under 25
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah.
It's the neighbor behind that wanted to see out across.
They couldn't reach.
It was the style. It was-
So the 30 feet height in, when allows you to have,
You can do a 2-story house with 9 or even 10-foot ceilings
And a peak roof.
and a peak roof in that height
For the 30-foot.
on a flat lot.
Yeah. And that's all, you wouldn't want more than, well, you wouldn't have 3 stories anyway. For a single family.
They exist.
On
And you
some
could- and
of
you
those
could-
lots, but it's like a lockout basement type.
And I could, in 30 feet, if I had to, I might be able to squeeze it in. Because I'd end up with a truss in the roof, that's the roof, and then I can have an center section that's part of the house. So I could actually get 3 stories in that. Takes some work, but you can get it in.
But the 40 is really the 3-story.
Yeah. Now, I gotta ask this question. Define a cottage cluster, because what I understand as this cottage cluster is different than what this criteria is that's showing up.
Across from Dairy Queen, those.
Is that, yeah, are those little houses that were moved in on 19th and College considered a cottage cluster?
Four of them, they share, yeah, I mean, that, to me, that looks like a cottage cluster. I mean, probably not how we'd want it now, but it, like, that's when I drive by it, I go, oh, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
what about the one?
Are they on individual separate lots? Because we're saying we can go down to 2,000 square feet a lot
For all those
for a cottage
2,000, I think it is.
per, well, I mean, what we have here is just 2,000. And I'm just,
The cottage cluster code that I was looking at, not per se the code back here, but sizes them per lot, so
per lot.
cottages per lot, yeah. Now, I'm not hard and fast on that.
Rentals. I thought you'd do it for owning a house.
No, you typically have you'll have a shared land ownership. And then you would have individually owned dwelling units.
Okay. So you own
Can we
inside
pause
the
there
home.
for a second? Commissioner Rose has a question, and I'm always bad at seeing that, so I want to jump in there and get her.
Thank you, Gary. I have a question about cottage clusters. Is there a maximum number that can be put on a lot? Because Corvallis had an issue, is having an issue with that. I think where a developer wants to put like 18 separate living units, like studios on one lot, and the neighbors are not happy about that, but the developers are going on the state's version of what is allowed. I don't have the details with me, but I saw something in the newspaper about that. So thoughts on that?
So the language that we pulled comes from King City. They just have gone through this with the LCD and several consultants, and this is the language that they came up with. There's a lot of this that I like, that's added to there. It's got requirements for the common courtyard design and how it's going to be laid out. They've got requirements for if you're going to include parking, what that needs to look like, the walkways and pathways between units, community buildings that are there. But I think, Commissioner, to answer your question directly, I think you're going to base it on the, it's the number of square feet that you need, or the total square footage you need per unit that's involved. So that's going to be the determining factor. If you've got a 2-acre parcel, you're going to be able to put more on there. If you've only got an acre, you'll have half as many that would be allowed. So that's how you control the number that get put on there.
Did you guys have a maximum lot size? Is that rows missing?
I don't think we did in the R2. We were trying to leave that flexible
But that, putting a number there for the cottage cluster could
for a maximum good.
kind of limit what a cottage cluster could be, so you didn't have a.
So you say this is cottage clusters on 19th and College?
There's some tiny little, they were motel units that were in
Is
Corvallis.
this
that
what
got
we're
moved
talking
in.
about?
Yeah.
Which of course, the language that's in here that's being proposed would never allow that to happen.
Yeah. Those
Okay.
were,
None of them.
Okay, but that's what we're talking about, and we're talking about that the land is owned, and the legal arrangement is that the land is owned in common and you own your individual unit.
or that the land is owned privately, and that a space kind of like you would have an allocated space, kind of like a manufactured home park, some of a manufactured home park, except that you're going to have your shared common areas. So typically in a manufactured home park, you have your area, which includes your front yard and backyard and or side yard and parking space. A cottage cluster is similar to that you're going to have your assigned space, but you're not going to have your assigned yard. You're going to have a shared yard and a shared parking area. So it really functions more like a manufactured home park than it does definitely not like an RV park, right, where you're coming and going and you're just renting a space there for the night. It's going to be a more of a long-term situation, but you're going to have your assigned space.
And these are detached or attached or detached?
Well, there's a reason about detached. There's something when do you allow for a duplex in a cottage cluster to increase that density again? Would you allow for a duplex or a triplex within your cottage cluster? Similar to what we were just seeing on College and 19th there. You could argue, so that was a bad example to look at.
Right.
If you envision let's say that we're going to say a maximum of a 1-acre piece of property in town, right? And within that 1 acre, you're going to have street frontage, so you're going to have some access. Once you get into the property, you have a place to park. Once you park, then you're going to have a walkway, and it's going to take you to some type of a central courtyard, and then it's around that courtyard that you're going to have the dwelling units. Whether those are attached, or they're detached, or they work their way around, again, it's how many number of units can you have per acre, not necessarily are they attached or detached. Attached or detached, in my opinion, doesn't matter. It's how many units are there. And so, you know, I would think we'd want some flexibility in there to allow for detached or attached. You know, up to a certain amount. I don't think you get up to 8 side by side, but I think you definitely go up to 3 side by side and still have common area.
There's a, homes on Apple, one side is on Applegate. I think the front may be 20th, maybe, I'm not sure, 20th or 21st. And it's an old, concrete block building. And it's kind of a horseshoe of small units. It looks like it might have been a motel at one time. But it's really very attractive. And it's got a nice front area in the middle. And each unit has a carport in the back. So, I mean, that's what I think of when I think of a cottage cluster. Is that it?
That's Applegate, and that's.
Yeah, they do them a lot for like retirement communities where you're more like aging in place, you have your own environment, your own home, but you don't need a lot more. It's flat, you can get to your car, you can walk safely.
Yeah.
And it's affordable, so you don't have to move into a retirement home.
I know.
800 square foot home.
In the 20s in Los Angeles, you would call these a courtyard structure. Where you would typically have, you'll see it in a lot of movies that are set in the 20s, 5 or 6, and they're usually attached down either side with a common walk-in entrance gate. And that's what I was envisioning as this courtyard type of thing, rather than just a whole field.
And again, we looked at some images, some layouts. There's a lot of examples. If you Google search cottage cluster Oregon, take a look. There's some great examples. There's a lot of good architectural and engineering work that's gone into how these could be laid out. Different examples and things. And again, we're a little careful in the code not to do a lot of imagery, but we could definitely have some design styles that could go along with the code. To kind of vet these out a little bit, and we're not the first one out of the gate. Cottage cluster has been in Oregon for a long time. When I first started here 10 years ago, they were kind of the rage, and everybody was, you got to have cottage clusters in your code. And it is a nice alternative to get, higher density in an area. You can see in here we've included in the R2. It's not allowed in the R1. It's not allowed in the R3. It's not dense enough. But in the R2, where it fits, it's a great alternative to get some higher density in there. And it's another alternative for people that maybe don't want to live in a big apartment complex, and they don't need a 2,400 square foot house either. They just want a small spot, and it could be people that want some community around them still. So they like the idea of having, a shared garden area, shared front entry area. Those could all be benefits. So.
But they are individually owned.
They would be individually owned.
Can they not be just corporately owned and rented like an apartment
They
complex?
could be, yes.
Isn't there like a co-op in Southtown by a river or something? I think they do that. We have like a community garden and a community space and.
Yeah, there's some beautiful pictures on the internet.
I'm trying to think of when they came to us on those ones you were talking about on 19th. I can't remember where they were before, but it was like.
They were downtown Corvallis, right near the Milling River.
Was it? Because they said, well, these things are still good, but we got to get them out of here. Can we do this? And it was, why not? Try it.
I mean, it's the
And
same up to our standards that we're gonna have, but it's the same concept.
Part of the one in Corvallis, is up in arms about, they were trying to, I don't know all the details, but part of the sales pitch was that it would help satisfy the CFA. That would be where they would put it.
But it does seem odd to put that in the middle of the.
Oh, the neighbors, it's not gonna happen.
I will say, I have had people call the office asking if we've added this code into, regarding cottage clusters into the development code and everything.
There's some,
They're calling?
What's up?
Developers that are calling you?
Well, I mean, people, yeah, people who've requested, they were like, do you have the code yet? We'd like to build something. Yeah, and, you know, and we have it, so it is nice to be able to finally have that. People call, request it.
The model code that you pulled this from, wherever you got it, what was the minimum lot size in that code?
King City?
Yeah, because, I mean, I'm wondering whether 2,000 is too big for a minimum in order to be able, when I'm looking at some pictures now, I understand what you're talking about. I mean, because if you look at some of the other dimensions that are here, you know, you must have 150 square feet of common area per unit. Right. And I got 150 square feet. And if I have 2,000 square foot lot, all of a sudden, a minimum 2,000 square foot lot, or per unit, minimum 2,000 square foot per unit, and my common space minimum in this particular model that he's given us is 150. Now I gotta build a 1,850 square foot footprint building, or that's kind of the spacing I'm getting in these things. The object is, and the ones I'm looking at here, you're looking at spacing between units of 10, 20 feet. And so I'm just curious what the number that code had, and that's where, if we're gonna follow this model, that's where I would go with this one. If it's 1,200, it's 1,200. If it's 2,500, it's 2,500. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Where I'm going with this.
Can I pause us? I'd like to propose a break, but is there anything we need to finish here real quick? And then maybe we come back and talk more comprehensively about the R2 since we skipped over it? Anything else? Okay, well then let's have a 5-minute recess.
I kind of time to read that, I wouldn't have asked that question, but I did, you know, like in Corvallis, there's a place where a developer is putting individual, like 500 square foot units, like 10 of them.
Right, but who are those targeted?
Well, that's what the neighborhood is not happy with, because it's a residential neighborhood.
Yeah.
And what family is gonna buy something like
Nobody.
that? It's gonna be students. And so, and there's not parking.
Well, that
Marlene.
Her beams are really pretty.
Oh, she sat down. She must have, something was going on.
All right. For recess, so, we were gonna talk about the R2 zone. What do you want to say?
Well, I mean, our R2 zone, obvious, it probably has the most three thousand types in it. But, and I think it's also probably the zone that we will get into over the map that we need to find the most adequate amount of space for, additional to what we had previous. But it's there to handle duplex, triplex, manufactured, cottage cluster, which can be pretty different housing types, but all kind of fit the same bill in terms of density. And how we've outlined this, it's not the case that zoning on the map is broken out by these are where townhomes go, these are where manufactured parks go, these where it's just anything's R2 and anything in those columns is applicable.
So when we add the single, I guess I'll back up. Single versus manufactured. Would there be any difference?
Between
I mean, manufactured is listed as a category in and of
This is
itself.
manufactured home park.
yeah.
So that should say park.
It should say manufactured home park.
Home park.
Can you put a,
We
can
don't
you,
differentiate between?
you put a manufactured home on R1 lot in the city?
Yes.
The only thing that prevents that would be CCNRs, so private conditions, covenants, restrictions.
And we're not allowed to restrict it by state law. Is that correct?
The city code is not allowed to restrict it from state code.
Why are the minimum lot sizes small for a duplex and a triplex than they would be for a single? And I'm assuming when you add the column for single, it's gonna have the 5,000 minimum.
With that.
Better up to 4,000 for a single.
For a single also, okay.
Fundamentally, the duplex and the single are gonna have the same numbers.
Within the R2.
And then I already wrote over top of what was there before, so I can't see what's there now, but in mine, I corrected the duplex to 6,500 and the triplex to 8,000. For minimum lot size.
I asked that question because I figured their footprint would be larger.
I can't see what there's now. I don't know if what's there now is per unit maybe or what, but I think when you just say you're doing a duplex, then you're at that minimum 6,500. Or if you're doing a triplex, it's minimum 8,000.
So 6,500?
That's what I described in there, yeah.
I'd like to get some education and hear some discussion about minimum lot size for single and minimum home size for single, because I'm sure that's gonna be a question that's gonna come at us from public, tiny homes or quasi-tiny homes or smallest possible home, those sorts of issues for, bringing the cost of housing down. And I think that's something that,
So if you can put a manufactured home and you could put a tiny home then, right? I mean, same thing.
well, if it meets whatever our minimums are. So that's why I want to discuss what our minimums are and why,
Think about that.
and try to reach consensus about
Yeah.
that.
So right now, our code says that your minimum square footage for a prefabricated home is 1,000 square foot. Period. So you can build something on site for 700 square foot, but if it's prefabricated, it's 1,000 square foot. And I don't know where that came from. I don't know where it got instigated, but that's what it says.
The lot sizes of
No, the size.
The build size of the building.
Living
the
space.
minimum.
Well, is it living space or is it footprint? Makes a difference.
It
Right,
is,
these questions.
it would be calculated from the outside of the wall.
Yeah.
The outside of the framing.
So, yeah, the code says the square footage can't be less than 1,000 square feet.
And what is the minimum when it's stick built? It's 750 you quoted?
There's no minimum right now.
There isn't a minimum.
Oh, there isn't.
The minimum is based on state building code, which says in order to be a dwelling unit, you have to have a bathroom, you have to have a bedroom, you have to have. And there's minimum sizes for each of those, and that equals some number. I don't know. I think it's in the 600 square foot range. But we could definitely look at those numbers.
Yeah,
Well, our house, when it was built, it's 1,019 square feet. And it's 3 bedroom, a bath, living room, kitchen, dining room. Maybe it includes the garage, I don't know. No, you don't think? Okay. So, I mean, there was 5 of us.
and I've been in 800 square foot houses that were.
So, I mean, 1,000 is
Yeah.
okay size,
Yeah.
I guess you could say.
1,000 beats a one bedroom apartment.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Right.
So it seems like you could go lower, I guess that was my point.
Do we want collectively to give the opportunity to do tiny homes in the city? I'm throwing that out as just as a question, not as an opinion.
Yeah.
Important question.
I think
R2 or R3?
homes a little bit. A home that's built on an axis and rolled into the lot. I think there's a place for those, similar to like a RV park type situation. I think that you could do for that type of setup. If you're just talking pre-manufactured, off-site and brought in and put on a foundation, I think there's a place for that too. I think the R2 is a great spot for that type of unit. I think you could use a tiny home to build a cottage cluster. I think you could do tiny homes on their own lot. I think you'd bring 2 tiny homes and put them side by side or 10 feet apart and put 2 of them on a lot that would be sized big enough for a duplex. So as long as you've got the minimum lot size, I don't have a problem with tiny homes, pre-manufactured homes being brought on site that meet that criteria. Our difficulty right now is we have the 1,000 square foot minimum for pre-manufactured. I do think there's maybe some value, there may be some value for that restriction in the R1. So you don't have a 600 square foot tiny home put onto a 5 to 10,000 square foot lot, a neighborhood with other 5 to 10,000 square foot lots.
Right.
Sense to me, but I think once you get to the R2, throw it out the window and not have any minimum size.
Well, you still might. Yeah. I guess you still have the building code minimums.
Still build
Right.
minimum.
Right. Okay.
Well, building code doesn't apply to a tiny home.
Once you put it on a foundation, it does.
Well, yeah, you put it on a foundation, but then you end up, but most of them are going to be on what's called park models, which
Well-
do not, which.
Well, that's an assumption that I think we need to talk about because maybe our code should say something about parks, like it does RV parks, right?
Why couldn't you just build it?
You could.
But because it's probably cheaper if somebody builds it in a little factory and rolls it to you and then.
It's the economics.
There's some do-it-yourselfers that will build them, but a lot of times it's people that can't afford or don't want to afford a larger home, and so they're just looking for something they can buy. And there's not a lot of contractors building those on site. They tend to be building them in factories.
We're selling kits.
We're selling kits for them. Yeah. So, and that is something that's missing here a little bit.
Yeah.
Is, right now the RV parks, recreational vehicle parks or trailer parks, those are restricted right now to our industrial zones. Regulated pretty heavy. The planning commission looked at that after the Letman development was approved. And there was a lot of angst, I think is a fair word, about more RV parks coming into town and taking over, and Philomath becoming this big tourist spot for people just coming and going. But there was just as much testimony that these aren't really tourist areas. These are residences, and they're going to be living there year round, and they're going to act more like a manufactured home park than they're going to act like an RV park. And so, using that argument, do we look in our R2 or possibly in the R3? Probably less appropriate in the R3, but do we look in R2 and make it possible for some type of a, I don't know if we would call it an RV park, but a tiny home park, and have some provisions about the differential between a tiny home and a recreational vehicle? Split that hair.
Could a tiny home be a pop-up tent too?
Again,
If
it's,
we're not specific enough, someone could pitch a tent, call it a tiny home, and then
If
we're
it's,
stuck
if,
with.
if it's an RV, then yeah, but if it's gonna be put on a foundation, then no. 'Cause it's
Right.
gotta be built. So,
Pop-up tent. RV pop-up.
yeah, it could be an RV pop-up.
You know, I'd like to make an argument because, I believe if you're in a manufactured home, I don't think you can get a home equity loan on a manufactured home. So if you're going to restrict tiny homes to tiny home parks, I mean, that seems to me to be segregating people based on income. And why not allow them to build a tiny home on a foundation? It's going to be much more valuable. And if you have those lots that can and should be split up, you know, maybe you allow a tiny home on a 1,000-foot lot, 1,500-foot lot.
Well, I think with modern manufacturing methods, even a manufactured home that's brought in and put on a foundation can be just as valuable
It
as a
does.
stick built. Not that they are, just in theory, you know.
There's a lot of prefabricated homes now being
Right.
done. Some of them aren't all that economical,
No.
but where, yeah, you come in and the house is erected by panel
Yeah.
in the matter of hours.
I was raised in a prefabricated home.
yeah, I don't really make a distinction on how or where it's built. It's a matter of, is it on an axis or is it on a foundation? And that's the only distinction I'm making. Is
Yeah.
I think if you're going to have a home that's on an axis, maybe we look at that impact of that land use differently than
Yeah.
a home that's on a foundation. It's definitely going to be potentially much more transient, right? Because all you have to do is hook it up and you're gone, as opposed to a unit that's there, and
Yeah, and
if
that
you're
makes
gone,
sense.
the unit's still going to be there, right?
Yeah.
So,
If there's wheels, it has to be in a park, and if it's on a foundation, then it's just building code requirements, whatever that is.
but do we want to look at provisions that would allow for a tiny home or a smaller scale RV park, to some scale, an RV park in the R2, as opposed to limiting it to the industrial areas of town?
Do we have like a lot that would fit a tiny home park essentially, as opposed to a mobile home? Cause I mean, that's gonna be a much smaller footprint where we go, we have nothing we can do with this tiny spot here. Let's see what happens.
I would say,
Would that be, or wouldn't they be similar sized, at least in a grouping, like a cluster?
Yeah.
So kind of like either or?
Would just need, the only issue with that would, if you're not stationary, you have to have room to park them and plant them and, but it would still be a much smaller footprint than a mobile.
Right, you do the same thing with
Yeah.
a cluster.
I have a question.
yes,
KOA and-
Go ahead.
So how, in one of these tiny home clusters or tiny home places, how would utilities be handled?
I've seen, they're gonna be similar to a manufactured home park. So they're gonna have one utility bill, and then it's gonna get shared amongst the tenants or residents there.
And the sewer, how is that handled?
Similar, yeah, similar. They're gonna have one lateral that goes to the property, and then it's gonna split, and you'll have shared sewer lines, private lines on the property.
Okay,
Some manufactured home park.
okay. I just didn't know how that worked.
I really think of a cottage cluster, whether you're using small homes or big homes or whatever size the homes are, but a cottage cluster typically is gonna have smaller homes. And I really do see it as just like a manufactured home park, except that they have shared front areas, they have communal areas, right? So that each individual home or dwelling unit doesn't have to have its own yard and its own parking. You've got those in common, which allows there to be a lot less space that's needed for all these backyards and side parking areas. And that everybody has a shared front yard, and you've got this communal parking area, which allows you to get a lot more dwelling units on that same amount of space. So, but as far as the other provisions, I think of it very, very similar to like a privately owned manufacturing park,
Except they're buildings.
except they're smaller buildings and they have shared common areas.
So if they had shared common areas, is it PC, or is that a goodwill effort? Is it an HOA?
You're gonna have private ownership, and then, yeah, you're gonna have some type of a buy-in to live there. You're gonna have a space rent, or you're gonna have a ownership, a partial ownership in the land, or, you know, there can be different arrangements made. You own it, right? There's something that you own that you're gonna build some equity in as you're there over time, and when you're ready to leave, you've got something you can sell, rather than just paying rent, you know. So it does help encourage, it gives the potential to encourage some ownership and some equity.
Financing on those isn't like only. I just wouldn't want to. You build it, they will come. You build it, and then oops, we didn't think about something. You know, like just.
Those are good questions. Well, I think it's our job here to get educated on these issues and to come to some sort of consensus of a draft of this. And then if we do our job for public outreach, when it comes to public meeting, we're gonna hear from the public on this issue. Because it's already been an issue in the city a few times.
Would there be homeowners association with each of these areas where you could put the tiny homes so that you know that people are keeping things up so that one person doesn't destroy somebody else's property value by not taking care of things?
I think there's different ways they can be structured. You can do the HOA. You could have one owner that takes care of it and, you know, rents the space out to the others. I mean, I can imagine several different ways that could be set up. And I don't know that we would get into a lot of that in the land use side of things, other than just to allow for flexibility in how they're owned.
Okay.
I mean, the main aspect and what we want to make sure that the code is explaining is what's the impact going to be on the property? What's the impact going to be to the neighborhood? What's the density going to look like, and how's that going to impact? And of course, then looking at connectivity, the walking, the biking, the transportation, the transit amenities, all those things come into play. And then making sure there's enough common space that, you know, it's not overly taken advantage of. The cottage cluster is still a nice living situation. So, you know, I think the code needs to answer those, but a lot of the questions on the ownership and that, the code doesn't need to really address that stuff.
In terms, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Nope, fine.
Oh, in terms of, say, the cottage or the tiny home, what would your minimum lot sizes be? Or is that the term you guys have 2,000 there, but I guess I would look at those and think of, at least for one unit, whatever it is, it'll be less than that. I mean, 500 feet or.
It might be too high. That 2,000, in my mind, I was envisioning a shared common area and your shared parking area of some sort, and then just your open area in general. How much open area do you want to have per unit? You know, if each unit's, say, 800 square feet, or maybe it gets down to 600 square feet or smaller, that's just the footprint of the building. So then how much space do you want? If you got 10 feet between them and the next building, plus you've got your common area, plus you've got some area for some level of potential parking, then it's, you know, it's how many dwelling units do you want to have? 2,000 square feet of space on the lot.
Oh, so there, on the 2,000 square feet, it would be more than one building.
No, it'd be, you know, if you had a 5,000 square foot piece of, or if you had a 5,000 square foot piece of property, then you could put two, that would be this kind of. So I don't know, maybe the two's too high in that case, you know,
Yeah,
it seems like it.
The King City language has a maximum building footprint of 900 square feet,
okay.
and maximum average floor area for a cottage cluster is 1,400 square feet per dwelling unit.
So what was the 900?
900 was the maximum building footprint.
And was there a minimum?
Minimum? No, it just
Okay.
says a minimum. No, that's building separation. And then there's an exemption for attached garage or carport of another 200 square feet.
I mean, these other numbers, side, garage, all that, those would be, some of that you wouldn't even have that for garage setback. Things like that, you wouldn't even have those things.
You wouldn't have those criteria?
Right.
No.
I'm thinking no garage with clusters, but that's.
Well, but, you know, if you have a group of buildings like that, it might be reasonable to have some sort of a building where they store the lawnmower or the gardening supplies or the, whatever it is.
Shed.
And so you might have something that looks like your garage.
Well, we can work on the table and the numbers a little bit more and polish these up based on the discussion tonight. And bring these back to you. We'll do a little bit more work on our questions that will come up tonight as well. Is there anything else that we can look up and bring back to you on the table?
Can you look at the building code requirements for tiny homes? Do those exist?
Yeah. Appendix AQ, the International Residential Building Code. Appendix AQ, 2021 IRC. And the Oregon Specialty Code refers back to this one in its entirety. So Oregon didn't do anything different.
Willamette doesn't have anything. That's what you.
You know, I'm just thinking, it seems to me we're trying to allow people a means to buy homes. It's not our goal to establish some kind of a transitory park, if you will. But it seems like certainly, I mean, I've seen pictures of beautiful tiny homes, and I'm certainly in favor of tiny homes, but I'm not sure I'm in favor of
Free homes coming in and out, et cetera.
I think I agree with you, but I think if we have a weird lot somewhere and we need to do something with it, this might be our best option. We do something with the lot for the city, and B, give people an opportunity to own and or have somewhere to
Well,
park
what
their
are,
home.
what do you think when you say rear lot?
I don't know. I mean, I'd have to look at the map and we'd have to go through it all, but I feel like at some point in time, and it could be 15 years from now, you have like a weird little pocket that no one's developed and it's just kind of sat there and, you know, the code goes, oh, hey, we can now, you know, do this with it. Obviously we don't right now because we have enough land available, but to give us the option when we run out of space.
But I would think if you wanted to develop that little tiny home development,
I can't think of, go up Seventh and turn on College. And at the end of College, because it stops and doesn't go clear through, on the, there's a lot that's just trees.
oh yeah,
When you turn to go on to Dampier,
yes.
that's about the only thing that would fit there is a tiny home.
Yeah.
It can't be bigger than 20 by 40 or something like that square feet.
That's just one, right? Like one lot.
Just one, yeah. I mean, but
But I'm sure there are larger lots that could accommodate three.
Yeah, I think the takeaway is we wanna still preserve the character and the look and the feel of a residential neighborhood that's low density residential. So I don't think we wanna take that out of our code. And you know, that's where a lot of cities are hearing the most complaints is their R1 is a lot of duplexes coming in with the ADUs and the duplexes, and then codes allowing for even more flexibility and commercial activity. But that character of that neighborhood starts to dramatically change from what it was when people bought the home and lived there. I think what we're proposing still maintains the R1 and the feel. The R3 makes it very, very clear that this is gonna be multifamily, high-density housing. And it could be apartments, it could be condominiums, right? It could still have an ownership piece to that. But that's there. And then the R2, what we're really trying to do is just allow as much flexibility in that R2 as possible. And when we look at the zoning map here in about 2 minutes, and we won't spend a lot of time on it tonight, until more time you want, what you'll see in the zoning map is we've tried to find a lot of area for the R2. We preserve the R1 where it's at, and those surrounding areas. There's future area, which we'll look at for R1, which will probably be some R1 and some other mix as well. But it's pretty extensive, the amount of R2, and that really does allow the flexibility. And it's in areas that are already, again, are pretty, you know, smaller lots, smaller homes already, quite a bit of variety there. And so, you know, that character of that neighborhood already allows for quite a bit of flexibility. We're just adding to that, I would say pretty extensively, adding a lot more variety to it. I would encourage you to go online and, you know, Google search for cottage cluster, Google search townhomes in Oregon, and look at those layouts. There's some great layouts where you got, you know, a house and a duplex, and then on the corner is the cottage cluster with 8 units in it. And it fits very nicely into the rest of the neighborhood. It does not look out of place. It fits right in with a couple of units, you know, facing this street, a couple facing that, the others tucked back in. And it really doesn't take anything away from the neighborhood at all when you see them in there. So definitely look at the cottage clusters, the townhomes similarly. I think there's more we can do with the lot sizing, the minimum lot size for the townhomes to encourage townhomes. We're gonna see some townhomes come in at Mill Pond Crossing, which I think will be helpful to see. I think those ones they're looking at like 8 long, which would be a max I think that's in here. Again, it allows for homeownership with that shared wall. It's a great way to go, and if you can lower those minimums even on those, you can get some great, you know, 400 or 500 square foot townhomes that you can buy. You know, I've got kids living in town renting an apartment that would love to be buying a, you know, 500-600 square foot townhouse right now, but they don't exist. They're not anywhere in Philomath. We're just not building them because our code doesn't encourage them. In fact, we discourage it by meaning you have to have a 5,000 square foot lot to put a 500-600 square foot townhome on it. It doesn't work. So a lot of the changes we're making are going to allow for that higher density I do want to point out too, it doesn't require it, right? And I get that developers are gonna go to the highest profit margin, but not always. Some of these are individual property owners that have a house sitting on a property, and it's like, oh, with this new code, one, I'm not zoned commercial anymore, and now I'm R2, and I've got all of these different options for additional housing. And it's not just I gotta build an ADU in the back, right? I can make my home into a duplex or a triplex, or I can make my home into townhomes and do some lot line adjustment here and own my home and add on it. So I think we're giving homeowners and property owners, not just big time developers, we're giving homeowners and property owners a lot more flexibility to help add some residential housing units, but to also add some income and some value to their current properties. So and kind of work through the kinks a little bit on it. So I appreciate everybody going through and spending the time. There's a lot to get our heads wrapped around, but really if that R2 can become a lot more flexible, it's going to be a nice little hub. I think it'll be some great neighborhoods build up throughout.
But if we surround the R1 with R2s, my concern would be the blending. It's not gonna, like, I don't want it to look segregated in any way, but if, you know what I mean? It could just, there's no barrier, then you've got a higher density with a lower density, we've got noise, we've got other things. Landscaping just has such a huge impact on these type of things that it just, I don't want it to look like up in the, well, we're gonna get into the map, I guess I could. Never mind, I'm getting ahead of myself.
And I'll just say nationally, there's a lot of effort to get away from individual zoning altogether. And it makes sense not to have the noisy, loud factory right next to the daycare centers. But within residential neighborhoods, there's a lot of larger cities that are just doing away with that, and they're building by type, not by zone. And there's some benefits, there's some disadvantages, right? There's a lot of me that's very traditional. It's like, I want to live in suburbia right now. But eventually, as I get older, I don't want to live out and have a big yard and a bunch of stuff to take care of, right? I want to live in something smaller, easier maintenance, and I can leave for a week or two and come back to. The code requires that we provide housing for all types and amenities. But there's a special focus, as we read at the beginning, to focus on that medium and low income housing. It doesn't build itself. We've got to encourage it, and the code's got to help encourage it. So as much as individually we may not like the idea of living in a really, really dense area, the code has to allow for that type of development to take place.
We also want to maintain the area as itself. Like, we don't want to become Portland. We don't want to become these other towns that we're pulling code from just because they've done it before us. We have, this is an area where we're very outdoorsy. We have the beauty of having like 8 months out of the year sometimes. It's sunny. People want to garden. Like, that's the worry I have with R1. If we minimize it so much, we're not giving people the opportunity to move here and have a garden in their backyard and have all these things that's why they're moving here. It's not just to like bulk up our area so that we can all cram into one small space together. If we still have to keep the integrity of where we're living because we choose to live here because of that. I feel like that's kind of our part in being a part of the commission is, hey, there's a human side to this, not just, getting a bunch of butts in seats. It's let's maintain, gardening and outdoorsy. And I worry that if we cram too much, we're not giving people the opportunity to do that.
And nothing in here is going to tear down any of the existing R1. It's all new development that's coming in. And frankly, that new development's not coming into Philomath right now, and people aren't moving to Philomath because we can't afford the development code that we have right now. Because to build on a 7,000 square foot lot and put a 2,500 square foot house in there is over $500,000 today. And so in order for people to move to Philomath, we have to provide them options of a 5,000 square foot lot with a 1,800 square foot home on it. And right now, the lots as big as they are, you can't afford to put an 1,800 square foot house on it because the utilities and the lot itself cost you too much money. And so there's a balance, right? And again, which is why we kept that 10,000 square foot maximum there. So you can still build what we've been building, but this allows the option for something that's more affordable for people as well. And to not have to live in an apartment complex or a condominium to do it. You can still live in a single unit residential and have a very nice neighborhood feel to it. You just recognize it's going to be a little bit smaller than what it is today.
There's very, very little that you can do in the old code and that you won't be able to do here. Very, very little. I mean, I think just building lower density apartment complexes in R3 compared to the 24 unit per acre minimum that we put in is like one example, or the frontage, extending the frontage so that we can't have these informal flag lots. But pretty much everything as it currently stands in our existing code, I think you'd still be able to do in here. At least that was the hope. It's just that we're offering people more tools and more flexibility to build denser, for developers to come in and build denser in areas that are appropriate.
You know, it's that last, but I mean, if it's currently zoned R1 and it's built out with residential, nothing in here we're doing is really gonna allow a homeowner to split their lot in half and put a new 5,000 square foot lot next to them, unless they're already on a 10,000 square foot lot, right? So existing R1 is gonna stay that same look and same character. And I would argue a lot of the R2 will too, other than where we're doing zone changes from commercial to residential. That area may be impacted more. But you'll definitely have a little more flexibility in the R2, but even there, if you're on a 6,000 square foot lot or a 7,000 square foot lot in the R2 and your house is in the middle, you're kind of limited on what you can do other than maybe, add on to the side or, there's a little you can do, but I don't see wholesale somebody coming in and buying 5 lots in town and building a huge complex, right? This is gonna be, it's gonna come in pieces, and I think it'll come in property by property, not large swaths of it coming in all. Anyway. Good discussion.
Okay, if nobody wants to have any further discussion on the code, we can talk about the map. Okay.
So I'll then share the screen so that, Councilor Commissioner Rose can see us, what we're looking at and talking about here. So I'm gonna pull up the online map with I have to turn off the closed captions when I do this, sorry, I forgot, otherwise it takes up all the space. I have to stop share. Can I pause share? Oh. Sorry, my first time driving.
Well, what are you doing now? Can you tell us what, I couldn't really see what the printed map was showing. Can you say what it was supposed to show?
So, it'll be a little more legible when it clears up, but these lots, especially in the downtown area, have a bolder section around them, and anything that's broken out is a lot that the land use committee is changing dramatically, but those are where the changes.
So is this identical to what we looked at last week without any revisions?
This is,
No, I said last week again.
2 weeks ago. The shading has changed, let me pull it up. I've got the live map up, but let me pull up this one that was in the packet. We included the residential on it. Pull up ahead of the meeting. Apparently I'm sleeping today too. But what it'll show is same thing we had 2 weeks ago, except that we've put a big black border around any of the residential that we were recommending changes to that residential zone.
Okay.
And
So any changes that we discussed a couple weeks
I
ago
mean,
are
isn't it
still
the same places where the black is folded around those?
well, let's pull it up on the screen so we can see it better. This open that copy and Commissioner Rose, you seen that okay?
Yes.
So maybe we'll start up north and I'll just kind of talk through where we were looking at. We didn't go into the urban growth boundary too much. Urban growth boundary is where the MDR and the LDR, so medium density residential is the blue, LDR is the low density red. That's outside the city limits, inside the urban growth boundary. We haven't really vetted that out too much yet. I'm going to say it looks reasonable.
What's the definition difference?
Low density residential is equivalent to the R1. Medium density residential is anticipated coming as R2.
Okay.
And this is not existing, this is what you came up with.
This is what's existing.
It is.
So all of the LDR and the MDR is what's existing now. We didn't change anything there. So the first changes we're recommending are here on north.
Which one's the mill, apparently, just so I know.
It's right here.
Okay, thank you.
So the first big change is all of this red right here. This is North 13th Street. This is North 13th. This is North 12th. And then this spot that juts out here, this is 11th. And then this is Quail Glen. So we're recommending all of that be changed from R3 to R2. Medium density residential. There are no large apartment complexes there, and we don't anticipate any large complexes there, and we don't want any large apartment complexes in this area necessarily. So the R2, as we've kind of better defined it here, we think is a good fit for this whole area.
Why the Quail Glen? I mean, those are all single family houses.
No, this is all duplexes and townhomes up or in Quail Glen. Right here.
There are some single family.
There's a few single family, but a lot of this is duplexes
Oh, okay,
and townhomes.
okay.
Chris, what's the significance of the kind of apricot colored R2?
This is existing R2
Okay.
right now. Yep.
And then so down.
Yeah, there's a little bit down here too. So
Are
this
they
is
in the
existing
city?
R2. So yeah, this is in city limits. This is the piece that just got annexed a few years ago
Oh,
by
okay,
Levi.
okay.
He annexed that. They're looking to do some development along here, but it has constraints right now that there's not a good sewer line that feeds up to it, so they're constrained with lack of sewer. This is the manufactured home part.
Yeah,
So they've just expanded out here. You can see some of the new development with the new homes out here. So this will all fill in. The creek runs right here. So with their expansion, they put 2 crossings in over the creek down here and one up here. And so they'll start filling this all in with additional manufactured homes.
Is the brownish area there, is that all northern wood?
The brownish area, this here.
Yeah.
Several
No,
different
it's other,
businesses.
it's other things too.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different businesses there.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of other back in here. Northern Wood is actually down here on this LI.
Oh, okay.
This is Northern Wood. So again, this is existing R1 in here. This is R1 right now. We're recommending to consider moving that to R2. This is the undeveloped portion of Starlight Summit. Which will offer a little bit higher density and future development there. We're looking at with Interfor going out of business, this is currently zoned R3. And the recommendation that's going to be to leave that zoned R3 until we hear otherwise from future owner, whoever that might be. It's actually a great spot for some higher density residential. It's got good highway access. It's actually not bad walking to get to Dollar General, to get to the clinic, whatever future commercial development comes in here. It's not going to have a big impact on any other existing neighborhood with traffic, so You know, this was right now zoned R3 on the map. We talked about rezoning that to industrial when we were originally talking, but then again, with Interfor closing the mill down, I think we just leave it as R3 until we hear from the property owner anything different.
If it is, built as multifamily, and then the mill starts back up, is that gonna be a problem?
Yeah, I mean, when the mill comes in, then we talk to the mill about sound barriers and, you know, all that kind of stuff, so. Depends on who gets there first, yeah. Here, one every night. But you're right, it's a
I'll go live
consideration.
next door to it.
It's a consideration. The next big change is kind of following here. There's a pocket of property here. This is the rodeo grounds, the frolic grounds, Skirvin Park. This is privately owned by the church now. It's a great little pocket for some higher density residential. So this is one of the areas that we're recommending to consider for R3. Again, walking distance to the downtown, pretty minimal impact on existing neighborhoods if it were to have some higher density there. So I think it's a good pocket. We did have an apartment complex that was interested, or a higher density developers were interested in that before the church purchased it. There were just too many unknowns because it wasn't zoned. They were having to rezone it. They were having to do some floodplain mitigation, or some wetland mitigation, and there's just one too many unknowns for them to check all the boxes and make it happen, so they backed away from it. But there's definitely some interest there, some higher density residential. We looked at this part that's zoned R1 now, of rezoning that to public because it's owned by the city and used as the frolic and rodeo grounds. The piece here, we're not sure what to do with. This is the Weeds logging property. It's a separate tax lot. I believe it's 2 acres. Heavy industrial use. There's probably a little bit of industrial cleanup to be done on it. Don't know, but it doesn't make sense to be industrial right there.
There's our tiny home park.
There's what?
Tiny home park. I'm
Yeah.
kidding. Sorry, before you go.
You know, potentially, there's a lot of potential uses there. I don't know what to do with the zoning on it, honestly. It doesn't make sense to zone it public, and then you kind of strap the hands of any type of residential development are there. I think the city and or the Frolic could have some interest in acquiring that property if it came up for sale, but it's tied up right now in an estate that the previous owners passed away, and his estate's working on some type of a sale or something. So we don't know what that will look like, but for zoning purposes, maybe we'll know more 5 months from now. But today, I'm not sure how to zone this 2 acre piece right here.
Well, here's a thought, and maybe doesn't even sound fair, but to rezone it to something else, not industrial. I mean, is it even in?
It's
really
zoned. It's zoned R1 right now, so
it is.
we can
Okay.
just leave it as R1
Okay.
until they do something
Yeah,
different.
let's leave it then.
It's gonna be a little pocket of R1 that's surrounded by public, but that's okay. Public and residential typically play pretty well together, so.
The
Other
lot
than a few nights a week.
The R1 that's just to the west along Mary's River, is that existing R1 there? That
This
one?
is existing R1,
Okay.
and it's so wet, you wouldn't wanna do anything. Try to.
Those wetlands? It's
Yeah.
pretty wet.
It's floodplain.
Floodplain.
It literally is floodway actually, so this is where the river overflows and spills across here. Yes, yeah. So next pocket we'll look down is down here. This is Mill Pond Crossing. These are single unit housing, smaller lots of 5,000 square foot or more, which fits our R2 definition. Would really fit our R1 definition, except they are looking to do some townhomes in here, so the thought was to go ahead and go R2 there. If we wanted to split hairs, you could go the new R1 for this portion of it, and do R2 for this portion of it.
Isn't that all already developed, what you were
All
calling
of the,
R1?
yeah,
Yeah, so it's a mute point.
It meets the standards. The question is whether somebody could, It probably comes to allowed uses as opposed to
Yeah,
development, right?
and the way that it's developed, you'd have a hard time doing a townhome or a, you know, I mean, so we really could look to rezone that to R1. If these are the standards we're gonna use, if we're gonna bump that minimum lot size in the R1 to something more than the 5,000, then we'd keep it as R2. So that one could go either way. But the new portion that's undeveloped, I think we're definitely looking at R2. I think the rest that we got, we did capture it here. Apologies, it's not gonna come up really clear. Oh, there it goes. Delay. So in this area, I think we talked about this when we were looking at the downtown. We were looking to get some R3 just on this north end of town here to allow for some higher density. So this would be looking at putting apartments in on this north end of the downtown commercial. The office residential here would be going to R2, and you can't see those R2s in there, but they're there
So
somewhere.
that's mostly between the alley north of College and the railroad tracks.
Right. So the C1 was gonna come up, got a map right? The C1 was going to come up north of 13th Street here, to at least this spot, and I think we came all the way up here to the alley.
Halfway up, yeah.
Yeah, so it'd be north of the alley, so, and I believe we came out to here, so you'd have commercial C1 here. And then you'd have your R3 up above to complement that. And then everything east of, did we say 14th or 15th? So 14th? We went out one more lot. I don't remember what we proposed.
Well,
But anyway,
we need to update the whole thing to
Yeah.
kind of see the.
The rest of the office residential here would go to R2. So we did not see the ability to upzone that to R3. That's like too big of a jump from the existing use and not a good fit for the rest of the surrounding area. The R2 seems like a really good fit for this whole office residential area. Until we get to the far east side. This is, come up just a little bit. This is the Oak Springs Apartments right now. So we would zone that to the R3. And there's multifamily development was allowed in the office residential as a commercial zone. It's office residential, they didn't have to rezone or anything, it was just an allowed use in that commercial, and so, which is fine, it actually works well there, but we'll just rezone it to the R3 so it's reflective of what's there in the ground. We did make note of the corners here, and I think we're looking at, this didn't print very well, so I apologize. I don't know what we did. Let's state R2, and I believe we went with R3, corner pocket as well to for future development, so.
The next step is probably to update the GIS and get it.
I guess there at that, above that OR in that blue, what you was just, weren't you suggesting that light industrial just above that? To change that to R3 also?
Yeah, that show up here, so.
No, on the left, the words.
Here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the triangle.
We did, so that is in there.
Okay.
This would go to R3, this would go to R3, and then the two lots on the other side of 20th Street would go to R3. So we would have a full pocket here of R3, east of 19th Street, east of 20th. This 20th Street here has been vacated, so it's now private.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, it's the 20th won't go through all the way. I think it ends about there, maybe right in here.
And the RV park is building an access to it, right?
The RV park will take access up here off of 19th Street. There's only emergency access between the RV park and the storage down here, but it won't be public access. So we talked about this stretch in here going to R3 as well. This would be east of 21st and west of Green Street. Definitely keeping this as this is current use as R1. Along here it was commercial, and we talked before about that the low density residential. At our last meeting though, we talked about along the highway, specifically this larger property here that's got a desire to do some growth. So there west, high density multifamily.
Oh, you wrote R2 there though.
Yeah, I have a few written down from last time.
Well, that's what you even have there.
2 or 3.
Well, those are twos.
Maybe I did say R2 then.
Yeah, I think it's.
Was it R2 along here? Okay.
Yeah.
You're right. From R1 to R2.
Yes.
Yes.
And then R3 was
Dense or not.
apartments, right? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And so from there. From there, I think the other change was out here. Going from R1 to R2. That's the. Is that not Kingdom? But anyways, that's the townhomes that are in here now.
Yeah, Ashbrook.
Ashbrook, yeah. It's zoned R1 now, and it's really more effective than R2 based on what we talked about. And then we'd keep the R3 out here on the end. I don't think we had any other changes other than those. This is, I'll speak to this. So this is all for low density residential or R1. It's in the urban growth boundary outside city limits. I don't think it behooves us to change those future zoning to medium density or high density at this point. But I think this is an area that we would look to our plan unit development, and we would look for this to come in a large swath and have a mix of use of low and medium and some high density. So obviously we would gear the higher density towards Scout Drive and some medium density, and then our lighter density towards the existing neighborhoods to have, again, the least amount of impact on the existing neighborhoods as possible. Keep your higher densities, down in this area where you've got access. So you'd be going through those more the single family.
What's the purple seat?
Purple Seat is a commercial zone. I think the intent was there some type of like a neighborhood nook. It's a 5-acre parcel, so it's a pretty big little neighborhood nook.
No, pump stations.
Just the carve out for some commercial. I think that, not to spoiler, but there's some language in the residential code that I've been looking at that would allow for a little bit more of an expansion of our home occupation permits. We're not talking like grocery stores in the residential neighborhoods, but definitely looking to expand or take a closer look at the allowed uses for home occupation. Right now it's kind of limited to a small office, one customer at a time per hair salon, that type of thing. But I've seen some code that allows for a little more flexibility that could allow for maybe some type of a smaller convenience store that wouldn't allow for any parking necessarily, but it would be more like a neighborhood commercial district, and there's some pretty tight constraints. But if you go like a garage conversion into like some type of a mini mart type thing, it could be accessed from neighborhoods, so you could walk to the store to get your dozen eggs or whatever it would be, as opposed to hopping in the car and driving into the center of town. That kind of look, but I'm just starting to explore that language now, but it might replace the need for like this commercial node that you still, for all intents and purposes, would want to hop in your car and go the 5 blocks to get to, or maybe hop on the bike, but I think that's the idea there. So we're still kind of exploring that, and maybe it does just stay that commercial area that is as opposed to having to get into the downtown.
And hey, the biggest section there, not the LDR on the right-hand side, all that, when they wanted to develop that, I think that was would be 690 homes. So, there's a lot of space for that. I just,
600 is a big number, you know?
well, when they had the vote, that's still, it got voted down.
Is that the Lowther property?
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
John, do you have a thought?
I just had a question. What Chris was talking about is this neighborhood commercial land use part of the.
Yeah. Part of it. That spurred me to look at some other code that
Sounds like
looks, but again, I think we can do it under the home occupation permit as opposed to having some whole different.
health resorts, how they have.
I think we just look at what's allowed under home occupation and maybe expand that a little bit, so I'm a little more comfortable, make it fit.
That makes sense.
Yeah, like family.
Any questions or anything that you're like, or anything you're like, yes?
Oh, I do have one. Oh, no, to do with that?
To do with the zoning.
I'm just gonna jump on this one. Starlight Summit, R3, R2.
Yeah.
I,
Get in there.
I understand. That's a large piece of property, 25 point something acres, 2 acres, so it's like 27 acres. And Mr. Rao Krishna health is not in the best of conditions, meaning that there's a high probability that sometime in the near future that property might be changed. The ownership may be changing on it. I'm just questioning, I'm just questioning putting the R2 where you have very limited ways to get in and out of it. Where most of the other R2 throughout the rest of the city, there would be ways to extend existing streets and the like to do that.
It's a big hike.
It's a big hike down the hill, as far as that's concerned, but it's also, you're funneling all the traffic out of that. If somebody came in there and did something on the high density side, okay? It's 25 acres, so I do something on the high density side. Let's say I want to do, what was it? We had here.
Townhomes.
The townhomes, which you're looking at 2,000 square feet per townhome. You can end up with a lot of traffic all coming down onto Pioneer.
There's nowhere to, you'd have to what?
Or you would, or coastal, if Fawn was connected to Foyle Run, you could get that way.
Street.
Down the 9th Street. But that's my only concern about it is the access. And if there's a way to come over by Mary's Road or whatever it is, Maryland Drive, some way through there to get an additional way in and out of it, I would say, okay, yeah, let's go ahead and let's look at changing that to an R2. But that would be my biggest.
Yeah, and we'd look at that. If you zone it to the R2 and then you get the development proposal, then that's the time that you look at the access and you do the traffic impact analysis and you make requirements that they have to provide off-site improvements for access. But at the end of the day, you're still looking at what are the allowed traffic counts for a local street.
No, I get all that.
And
I get it.
per day is that,
all that.
and you can get a lot more. Nobody wants to say it, but you can get a lot more traffic on that street, and it's still going to meet the requirements.
Yeah.
It's just going to mean more traffic in front of the houses of people that live there. But I will say the streets that are the through streets there typically don't have a lot of houses fronting them. They're side yard houses, and then most of the homes are facing north and south.
Yeah.
And the streets going up and down there are going north and south as well,
Yeah.
right? So you don't have a lot of house frontage that's gonna be looking at that traffic or dealing with that traffic, so they're gonna act more like kind of minor collectors. They're local roads, but they're kind of acting more like a minor collector and calling that traffic through.
How do you get down to Pioneer?
they get to Pioneer. But if you can get them not to go to Pioneer and get them out to 9th Street instead, but
I too don't like that as R2, or, well, I don't like it as R2. I don't live there, but the lots and everything up there are larger lots, bigger homes. I don't think that's appropriate to even have R2 up there.
Well, I hate to say this out loud.
Well, no,
I agree with you, but isn't there and excuse me, I don't know roads well enough, but there's the bus barn and there's like the dog place and the peak gymnastics, and then if you go up the hill, right over here, anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah, so isn't there an apartment complex like shoved in the right over there?
Yeah, Grand Oaks has they've got, I don't know what their zoning numbers are in
Yeah,
Corvallis,
there's
but-
part of it's.
But yeah, they've got single family
You
residence.
really notice it's there.
I've been mentioning that.
No clue there was an apartment complex over there. So I mean, the way they did it is nice. They did a great job throwing in
Integrated
a
it.
mixture of beautiful homes with a nice, and I feel like that's a good example if you can keep it with the trees and the atmosphere that, and it's not just we clear everything and we throw in a couple, and they're looking at essentially an apartment complex instead of the landscaping.
In terms of the access,
You
if
have to punch
if-
over it, you have to,
yeah,
right?
right, well, you'd have to do the other, but at least the county used to have the road actually from Corvallis coming all the way down, through there to the highway, actually. I don't remember, I think it was just a line on the map, but that's their plan someday. So it would fit, the city could say, yeah, you need to do this, because the county wanted this done anyway.
So you're saying that West Hills there somehow was gonna come down and end up going down Pioneer at some point?
No, down, I don't know what the name is, right there. Well, not that one, but.
No, it's right in there, and that feeds Pioneer. Sunshine.
Sunshine.
Is that actually paved? That's not paved, that's just a right of way.
that's paved up to here, but it's just gravel.
Yeah. it's
But
a-
it would-
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was meant to come down Sunshine, which turns into Pioneer.
Well, yeah, I mean, Sunshine's got grading issues and everything else, and
Well, when
if you look past the curves, then you gotta
And then it's just-
grade, and that's a tough sell.
when they pointed that out to us, we was laughing at them.
Yeah, that's when you look at things on a map two-dimensionally, and keep on the grid, you're crazy.
Escape routes.
See, even though I live real close there, I've never really explored up Sunshine. I'm gonna have to go explore it.
Well, we can have more conversations now too. Again, what we were tasked with was find areas that we can increase the density in some of these areas, and so, that's, again, I don't think R3 would be appropriate for some of the reasons that you've stated, but I think R2 done right, that's a lot of space that could have some nice density and a nice mix, right? You could get all the things that we talked about, the different variations of the R2, you could have a whole different mix of housing up there. Or you leave it R1 and you're just gonna get rows of residential, single unit development, which we need some of as well, so.
That's already been platted out, is it not? There was a master plan done for that at one point.
Nothing's been approved,
Well, nothing was ever approved.
no.
It's on a
Conceptual,
map, yeah, I mean, it's
It
on
was
a,
all conceptual though.
it's all conceptual.
Yeah, I'm just,
Yeah, and we've heard the whisperings as well, but I've been here 10 years and I've been hearing whisperings of that development or that property getting developed, and I think they have, it comes, then it goes, and it comes, and it goes, and so I don't put a lot of stock in it until they're meeting with staff and having pre-application meetings, and everybody's nodding their head instead of shaking their head, going, oh. So, anyway. Okay, well, we will go ahead and update the shape files and clean the map up a little bit. We will clean up the commercial and industrial we talked about already. So we'll get this to a spot where hopefully there's a little more comfort. And then again, as you kind of digest the other stuff, we'll update the table that we talked about. And then we'll keep massaging the development criteria, and we'll bring that to you as well.
Are you gonna maintain the previous version that says whatever, May 23 or whatever the date is? Or are we just gonna take that off?
I mean, we have a permanent copy of that because we
Well, yeah,
presented it, but no, well, I think we'll just move forward with a new map with all of the currently proposed, like the most update current.
And change the proposed to be proposed whatever date we
Put a new
updated.
date on it.
Okay, good. I think that's best.
Yeah, proposed as of this meeting.
I think actually this, to me, this looks quite good. It's very, with a few minor adjustments, I think it's very consistent with what has been discussed.
I appreciate the time you've all left on this evening.
You've spent a lot of time too.
Sounds like we're moving on from that and can have a staff update?
We should. Not a lot to report. We issued a decision on application by Divine Review for the Benton County Schools Credit Union. So that should get started. We also issued a decision on application for an ADU at 2018 South 13th. And building permits issued as of March 2024. We'll go through all of these.
Got a couple pre-application meetings, but we don't talk about those until we have a little bit more, just to respect the property owners and developers, but we've been busy with those and there's some like stuff's moving.
Do you know what's going in where Sissy's was, or is that? Can't talk about.
I will say I've had some people come and talk to us, but nothing official. Like nothing out of that, but some people have expressed interest in doing something with the property. I just been tight-lipped to say too much more about it, but
I've heard of Nutcakes was before.
Mm-hmm.
And something else was coming on.
Okay, so our next meeting is May 6th.
I won't.
And
Are you gonna have some for us?
yeah, what's the thought about?
we can do probably commercial. Some
We'll have an updated zoning map for sure. Have some new changes, probably track changes version in the commercial code. We'll make sure it's big enough to read. And then I think we'll bring back the the table that we looked at and update those numbers, get those back in front of you as well. I don't think we'll probably have time to do a lot of the code in the residential, because I know there's some commercial that's we're still working through, but at least the table, we'll bring that back so it's fresh in everybody's mind, so we can spend a little time dabbling. We'll dabble in residential, we'll dabble in commercial, and we'll dabble on the zoning map.
Okay. Okay, meeting adjourned.
Good night. Everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.